A faceless alien blocked the canyon trail and watched Elliot run. White UFO spheres split above the crazy mountains in perfect geometry. Patricia screamed for help, but the voice moved without a body. Elliot served search and rescue in the crazy mountains for 8 years. He carried ropes, radios, and trauma kits through brutal weather. He knew panic, injuries, and bad luck on cliffs. Nothing matched the call about Patricia Romano, age 53. She vanished during a cold November hike. Elliot deployed with Mara, a veteran rescuer. They expected exposure and confusion, not non-human hunters. Search and rescue called Elliot at dusk. Patricia Romano vanished near Crazy Mountains. Elliot drove in with Mara, headlamps cutting fog. Cold wind dragged across pines like whispering cloth. Patricia's boot prints led north between rocks and snow crust. The trail narrowed into a dead valley. A woman's plea echoed from ahead. The words sounded flat, like a recorded loop. The voice jumped farther in seconds. No human could move that fast. Elliot called Patricia's name and heard it echoed back. The echo matched his tone, but felt wrong. Mara stopped and listened, tense and pale. The valley felt staged, like a trap waiting patiently. Air pressure dropped and Elliot's ears rang hard. A white UFO sphere hovered above the treetops. It descended straight down, silent and steady. Elliot's GPS died and his compass spun wildly. His watch froze at 4:47 p.m. The sphere split into dozens of smaller spheres. They formed clean geometric rows over the valley. A fake helicopter thump started, then cut off. Faceless aliens appeared along the trail, evenly spaced. One alien blocked the path, arms too long. Its smooth face had no features, only black eyes. It copied Mara's voice, begging from behind them. Another copied Patricia's voice, crying from farther ahead. The aliens did not chase, yet distance felt stolen. Elliot and Mara climbed toward a rock ledge. Below, more aliens moved under spheres like stage lights. The spheres pulsed together, matching the hum inside Elliot's ribs. Elliot looked down and saw a staged formation, perfectly rehearsed. When they reached the ridge, the valley light was gone. The UFO spheres vanished, like someone flipped a switch. The faceless aliens vanished too, leaving blank snowfields. Wind slammed back into pines with a sudden roar. Snow began falling again, loud and painfully normal. Elliot checked his watch and felt nausea rise. 3 hours were missing from his shift log and memory. His legs still burned from climbing through frozen scree. Mara said her last minutes felt cut from film. She remembered pulses, black eyes, and a humming corridor. She could not recall the final climb to safety. Elliot remembered an alien watching, closer than his headlamp. He also remembered the scream moving, never losing breath. Their radios now played static with a slow breathing rhythm. The ridge camera showed only darkness, despite clear moonlight. At daylight, Mara returned anyway, driven by missing time. Elliot stayed above, scanning for spheres in open sky. Mara found geometric cuts in dirt, stone, and crusted snow. The shapes repeated circles, angles, and nested lines. Near a dry creek, she found a dull metal shard. It stayed cold in sunlight, like it rejected heat. She bagged it, and her phone screen flickered blue. Every photo saved then turned into white static instantly. Video files became black frames with skipping timestamps. Her compass pointed downhill, then spun, then died. The recorded scream returned again, flat, empty, and precise. It jumped from cliff to tree within seconds. A fake helicopter thump began, then stopped mid-beat. White spheres reappeared briefly, forming a grid above her. Faceless aliens stood between trunks, watching her without blinking. Mara ran out, and the valley looked normal behind her. Elliot understood the valley wanted rescuers, not lost hikers. It wanted witnesses it could edit, erase, and replace. They returned with stronger radios and brighter floodlights. Air pressure dropped again. Elliot's ears rang hard. White UFO spheres appeared above both ridges. More spheres split off in silence. They formed a perfect grid overhead. The grid rotated above the valley. Each sphere pulsed every 3 seconds. Faceless aliens stood along the slopes. They were evenly spaced and silent. Their blank faces swallowed light. Several lifted long arms and pointed downhill. Patricia's scream returned without breath. The scream jumped farther within seconds. A helicopter thump started. It stopped mid-beat. The spheres pulsed together again. The hum pressed into Elliot's teeth. Mara moved first, drawn by the moving scream. Elliot followed, watching the grid tighten overhead. Snow stopped falling inside the valley bowl. Breath fog thinned, then vanished in cold air. His compass spun. then pointed straight down. His GPS rebooted with impossible coordinates. Radio hiss carried slow breathing between static bursts. Faceless aliens appeared between trees. They vanished without sound. They reappeared closer with no footprints. A second scream copied Mara's voice. It switched to Patricia's voice mid-word. Elliot heard footsteps that never touched snow. The ridgeline aliens watched without turning. Mara found a cave entrance masked by loose rock. The tunnel felt polished and unnaturally smooth. Glowing symbols crawled along walls in repeating grids. The symbols blinked in 3-second cycles. Dark cables ran through stone in branching paths. Small spheres drifted ahead. They lit paths without shadows. Faceless aliens stood in alcoves, still and upright. Some carried pulsing orbs the size of fists. The orbs blinked with Elliot's breathing rhythm. One alien raised 3 fingers. The symbols brightened instantly. Another alien turned its head. The hum changed pitch immediately. Elliot felt the ceiling press lower. Patricia lay deeper inside, alive and shaking. Her eyes fixed on empty air. Parallel marks lined her wrists in perfect pairs. A metal door opened silently into a bright chamber. Mara lay on a metal table, unmoving and pale. Glowing tracks ran along her skin in precise geometry. Faceless aliens surrounded her, hands hovering, never touching. One alien faced Elliot. The hum sharpened into a drilling tone. Another copied Patricia's voice from the corridor. The copied voice begged softly. Then it laughed in the same tone. A sphere hovered above Mara, pulsing as a timer. Symbols covered the walls, then wiped clean. Mara's glowing lines flared once, then dimmed. Elliot grabbed Patricia and ran into darkness. Distance stretched around them. The floor felt longer each step. A doorway of light opened ahead. It folded shut again. Frost flowered on the walls. It vanished instantly. Elliot climbed through a ceiling break with Patricia. They surfaced under stars, far from the valley mouth. Mara was not with them. They were 5 miles away. No trail led back. The live feed saved only black frames. Patricia stared past Elliot's shoulder. She covered her ears at static. Her hands trembled, then went still. Elliot called Mara on every channel. Only hiss answered. Mara's phone pinged once at midnight. The ping came from the valley. At dawn, her truck sat unlocked. The cab was empty. 3 days later, Mara reappeared at her porch. She stood motionless and barefoot. Thin lines glowed under her skin. She would not speak. Her eyes tracked something unseen. Cameras filled with white noise nightly. The next morning, her front door swung open. Mara was gone again. No footprints marked snow. Elliot prepared a final return alone. He split his stream to servers in 3 states. White spheres rose from trees at shoulder height. Faceless aliens formed a line across his path. One alien touched his lens with 3 fingers. Symbols flashed across glass. They sank into blackness. The grid tightened overhead. It closed without any sound. His stream froze on white static everywhere at once. After that, only humming remained inside Elliot's files. Elliot entered the valley again as a witness, not prey. The live stream ran for 13 minutes. White spheres appeared above him and split into a grid. Faceless aliens stepped into frame and surrounded him silently. Then the feed froze on white static and never returned. Was the valley a trap, a lab, or a border gate? Did Elliot save truth or trade himself for it? Tell your theory below, then like and subscribe for the next case. A blue UFO hovered low, and aliens marched along the cliff. Lena heard her name spoken from a dead radio. Then the valley went silent, like it was holding breath. Lena Hardwell shot wildlife for 15 years, usually alone. A collar map showed wolves deep inside Absaroka wilderness. She rode in with 2 pack horses and sealed camera cases. At dusk, wolf howls turned into a metallic hum. A blue UFO rose, and the wolves answered with silence. Lena reached the meadow at dusk, fog threading pines like smoke. Wolves circled the grass in silence. 2 collared wolves watched her camp from brush. Their collars blinked once, then died. The horses refused the eastern tree line and sidestepped together. A low hum rose from the ridge and deepened. The pack kept perfect spacing, as if trained. One wolf lifted a paw and froze mid-step. Another lowered its head and stared uphill. Lena raised her camera and heard nothing click. Her breath fog thinned, then vanished. The creek gurgle faded, then returned muted. The meadow felt staged, like a rebuilt scene. A blue metallic UFO lifted beyond the ridge and hovered low. It held steady, ignoring wind and gravity. Small white spheres split away and formed an overhead grid. The grid rotated slowly and stayed perfectly centered. It tightened into a clean hex pattern above camp. 3 tall aliens marched along the cliff edge in file. Their limbs moved smooth, with no wasted motion. Their heads turned together, tracking Lena's smallest shift. A white pulse flooded the valley and washed the fog blue. Every device died instantly: camera, GPS, and recorder. Her headlamp stayed on, but the beam bent sideways. It skimmed the snow like water around invisible glass. No shadow formed beneath the spheres or the UFO. The hum matched Lena's heartbeat, then changed its rhythm. The radio clicked on by itself and spoke Lena once. The voice sounded calm, dry, and too close. A sphere drifted near her tent and stopped. It floated at shoulder height and did not wobble. The aliens lifted their long hands toward the wolves. The collared wolf collapsed, trembling, muzzle pressed into ash. The other wolves froze, awaiting permission to move. One alien pointed at the collars, then at Lena. Another alien raised 3 fingers and held them still. The overhead grid pulsed 3 times in perfect sync. Lena tasted metal and smelled ozone in cold air. The UFO shifted 1 meter without any arc. It then returned to its exact prior position. The wolves backed away, still silent, never breaking formation. Lena stood frozen, watched from sky and cliff. The hum faded, but the wolves did not leave. They paced a silent ring around Lena's tent. Their eyes stayed locked on the cliff line. The collared wolf still lay in ash, trembling. The blue UFO held steady beyond the ridge. The overhead grid dimmed, then pulsed once. 3 aliens remained on the rock shelf above. They stood upright, perfectly still, like sentries. A low sphere drifted nearer, then stopped midair. It cast no shadow on snow or grass. One alien lifted a long hand slowly. Every wolf froze in the same instant. Lena heard a click from a dead collar. The collared wolf's tag light blinked without power. Another wolf stepped forward and dropped torn strap fiber. The metal clasp was warm and smelled of ozone. The wolves did not snarl or bare teeth. They watched Lena as if weighing her breath. The aliens turned their heads together, tracking her hands. The grid loosened, then tightened into a neat hex. The hum returned briefly, then cut off. The spheres blinked out in a clean sequence. The aliens stepped backward into fog and vanished. The wolves stayed, holding the ring until dawn. At first light, the pack moved uphill in silence. Lena followed at a careful distance behind them. The wolves kept equal spacing, like a practice drill. They stopped at a dark circle in frosted soil. The circle edge looked cut with a blade. Warmth rose from ash fine as flour. A second circle weighted higher, identical and precise. A third circle sat near bare rock. The wolves refused to step inside the circles. The collared wolf approached, then backed away quickly. 3 aliens appeared on the ledge above, watching. A low sphere drifted down over the nearest circle. The wolves crouched, ears flat, eyes unblinking. The sphere pulsed once, and the ash shifted inward. Symbols flashed inside the columned glow, then wiped clean. One alien pointed at the collars, then at Lena. The collared wolf's tag blinked again, then went dark. Lena raised her lens and got one clear frame. The frame showed aliens facing the wolves, not her. The wolves turned as one and looked away. When Lena looked up again, the ledge was empty. Wolf tracks led straight, then vanished on bare stone. In December, Lena returned alone with upgraded sensors. She carried meters, filters, and a spectrum recorder. Snow erased her trail and softened every ridgeline. The meadow looked staged, like a rebuilt set. The horses refused water and stopped breathing loudly. Wolf tracks circled camp again, then ended cleanly. A collared wolf watched from trees, collar light dead. Another wolf stood behind it, perfectly still. No owls called, and no wind moved grass. The hum returned before any light appeared. It vibrated her chest and loosened her teeth. A blue metallic UFO rose behind the eastern ridge. It climbed without sound or rotor wash. White spheres split off and formed a rigid grid overhead. The grid rotated slowly and stayed perfectly centered. Aliens stood along both slopes, evenly spaced, perfectly silent. Their long fingers flexed, like counting invisible beats. The wolves stayed downwind, watching without a single sound. The collared wolf lowered its head and stopped blinking. Columns of light struck the ground in ordered rows. Each column held steady, then jumped to the next point. Snow did not melt, it folded inward into dark ash. Dark circles formed, clean-edged, identical, and warm. A circle appeared under every light column. The horses shuddered, yet their hooves never shifted. A collared wolf ran in, then stopped mid-stride. Its breath fog froze in place, then vanished. Lena's watch flickered, then lost a full minute. Her compass pointed down, then snapped to north again. Lena raised her camera and captured one clear frame. The frame showed 4 aliens beside the nearest light column. Their bodies looked too thin for their height. Their heads turned with no visible neck strain. A sphere drifted near her tent without casting any shadow. Her screen flickered between 2 times, then went black. A fractal ice pattern crawled across her lens. The ice vanished, leaving the glass perfectly dry. The wolves began circling, keeping equal spacing from Lena. One wolf stepped into ash and did not flinch. A dead radio clicked on by itself. It spoke in a dry mechanical voice, calm and precise. Observation noted. Continue observation. The message repeated 3 times, then stopped. The radio then spoke Lena once, without emotion. Aliens turned together, facing her camp in sync. The hum answered, rising in a slow breathing rhythm. Warmth spread through Lena's palm and wrist. Images flashed of hex cells under snow and stone. She saw wolves moving like pieces on a board. She felt watched from inside the ground. The blue UFO moved closer and paused above the dry creek. The overhead grid tightened into a clean hex pattern. Symbols pulsed inside the columns, then wiped clean again. One alien walked forward, closing distance without visible effort. It stopped near the circle edge and lifted one hand. The collared wolf dropped, trembling, muzzle pressed into ash. The other wolves froze, as if awaiting permission. The spheres blinked once, and the valley went dark. Lena packed fast, hands shaking, breath thin and sharp. Behind her, the hum matched her heartbeat, then changed. After that night, Lena identified 31 related survey sites. They spanned 4 states and followed the same hex grid. Every site produced the same radio message and electronic failures. The pattern kept expanding with patient and deliberate precision. Why would aliens want humans to keep watching their work? Are they mapping wolves, water, or the observers themselves? Share your theory below, then like and subscribe for more cases. A UFO shadowed Miguel for 7 miles along Highway 380. An alien appeared beside his cruiser under blue-white glare. Then the radio replayed Miguel's voice in metallic layers. Miguel Torres served as deputy sheriff in rural New Mexico. He knew long roads and longer silences. Reports came from the Roswell to Socorro corridor. Drivers described white beams, dead clocks, and missing minutes. Miguel logged them, then stopped writing details. Someone always arrived before sunrise. Evidence vanished. Witnesses went quiet. The highway stayed open, like nothing happened. Miguel called dispatch from a dirt turnout and reported position. Static answered first, then the hum returned again. He reported an orange-white glow low on the horizon. The speaker returned his words slightly higher than normal. It sounded like him, but hollow and metallic. He repeated the report and listened for human mistakes. There were none, only perfect timing and clean cadence. Miguel checked the handset and the speaker grill. He checked the antenna cable and the dash fuse. Nothing changed, yet the hum stayed exact. The glow held steady above the scrub, never drifting. Miguel watched it brighten, then hold, then brighten again. It behaved like something noticing his attention. He whispered a curse and swallowed dry air. The radio clicked and echoed his whisper back. The echo arrived with no breath and no emotion. Miguel eased onto the service trail and advanced slowly. The glow split into 2 lights, 30 feet apart. Both lights stayed at the same low altitude. They slid forward without drift, like pinned objects. Miguel kept his hands visible on the wheel. He changed speed twice to test them. The lights matched every change with precision. The hum landed with every skipped movement. The dashboard clock froze, then jumped ahead. The GPS map froze while tires still rolled forward. Miguel saw dust lift, then hang, then drop. The road looked darker under bright glare. He lifted a flashlight toward the nearest light. The beam bent away, curving around empty air. His ears filled with pressure without sound. His teeth ached like vibration inside bone. Miguel spoke again, slower, forcing calm. The radio returned his sentence as layered metallic echoes. The lights slid overhead and centered above his hoodline. Miguel felt watched by something counting his reactions. The 2 lights began skipping forward like missing film frames. Each skip arrived with the timed hum. A blue-white column formed beneath the left light. The column had hard edges like cut glass. It did not illuminate asphalt the normal way. The ground stayed dark, as if light was removed. Miguel swept his flashlight across the column again. The beam curved, then vanished, then returned behind it. Cold flooded the cabin without wind. His breath fogged, then stopped fogging, then returned. The engine idled steady, yet sounded distant and thin. The shifter trembled, then settled, then trembled again. Miguel gripped the wheel until his knuckles hurt. The hum deepened and pressed behind his eyes. His vision tightened, then widened, then snapped back. The lights above seemed closer, but never moved downward. They held position with unnatural steadiness. A dim silhouette appeared behind the lights. It looked wider than the road itself. Miguel could not find an edge or seam. The sky behind it looked wrong, darker than darkness. An alien stepped out from the blue column and faced him. It was tall, thin, and wrong in proportion. Its head looked smooth and elongated, with black almond eyes. Its limbs moved without sway, as if guided. It raised one long hand toward the windshield. Miguel heard meaning inside his head without words. The meaning felt like a calm command forward. His shifter moved by itself, then stopped again. The steering tugged left, then centered itself. Miguel fought both, breathing through sharp chest pressure. The alien leaned closer without footsteps or sound. Its fingers flexed with too many segments. The joints rippled, then locked, then rippled again. The radio clicked and spoke using Miguel's voice. The voice had no breath and no fear. It repeated his last sentence exactly, then paused. Miguel answered and heard himself return, slightly delayed. The returned voice sounded older and thinner. The alien tilted its head, studying his mouth. The lights above tightened, as if focusing. The blue column widened, then wrapped the cruiser in haze. Miguel tried honking, but the horn stayed silent. He tried shouting, but his voice felt distant. The hum continued, steady and patient. Miguel tried reversing, but distance felt unreal. The tires rolled, yet the scene refused change. The dashboard numbers drifted slowly, then froze again. The GPS showed impossible locations, then went blank. A thin smell of ozone filled the cabin. Miguel tasted copper and swallowed hard. The cabin air felt electrically dry. His skin prickled beneath his sleeves. The hum pressed deeper, like heavy fingers behind eyes. His heartbeat lagged behind itself. He watched his hands and felt delayed control. He blinked and saw double for seconds. The haze brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again. Shadows moved inside it, inverted and deliberate. Miguel saw dark forms hanging above the road. He saw long hands reaching toward the cabin outline. No door opened, yet he felt exposed. The alien raised its hand toward the glass again. Miguel felt a cold touch on his forehead. The touch arrived without contact. His hearing flattened, as if depth got removed. He could not hear the engine anymore. He still felt its vibration through the seat. Geometric symbols flickered across the windshield like brief frost. The symbols rotated and reassembled with cold precision. Miguel blinked, and they stayed one heartbeat longer. Then they vanished, leaving clean glass again. The radio replayed Miguel again, closer and older. The voice sounded like metal vibrating in water. It repeated a new phrase he never spoke. The phrase carried a gentle insistence forward. Miguel felt his thoughts separating into layers. One layer screamed and another stayed calm. The calm layer watched everything with detached interest. Miguel tried counting seconds, but numbers lost meaning. The haze tightened and pressed around the cruiser. His chest pressure spiked, then eased, then spiked again. His teeth ached with each hum pulse. The alien leaned back, then pointed down the trail. The two lights slid forward a few yards. Then they stopped and waited, perfectly still. Miguel felt that waiting as a demand. Images slammed into Miguel's mind without warning. He saw underground rooms beneath the highway corridor. He saw walls covered in moving symbols like circuitry. He saw rows of people standing with open eyes. He saw them dissolve into points of light. He saw those points stored inside a vast grid. A star map pulsed above the grid like a heartbeat. Each pulse matched the hum timing exactly. He saw his own cruiser from above. He saw himself sitting rigid, eyes unblinking. He saw the alien standing beside the hood line. He saw another figure behind the haze, taller still. The taller figure did not step forward. It stayed outside the light, observing. Sound snapped back like a slammed door in a tunnel. The haze vanished without fading or travel. Both lights winked out in the same instant. Miguel blinked and found gravel under his boots. He was far from the cruiser on open scrub. His cruiser sat locked, engine idling, lights still on. No footprints led away from the doors. No tracks crossed scrub between him and the car. Miguel staggered toward the road, dizzy and nauseated. A distant radio squawk cut through the returning night. Headlights appeared on the trail behind him. Responders circled the cruiser, checking doors and glass. They found Miguel lying beyond the beam edge. His eyes were open but unfocused. He tried speaking and produced metallic layered syllables. The syllables repeated with the hum rhythm. Then his normal voice returned in a rush. He asked why his car was moved. He insisted he never left the driver's seat. His hands shook as he touched his own face. He kept staring toward the empty sky. Station video showed Miguel sitting motionless for hours, never blinking once. When they found him, he was miles from the cruiser. Why do you think the UFO left his body but took his time? Comment your theory, then like and subscribe. A UFO dropped onto Highway 95 and pinned Mason's cruiser. An alien voice entered his skull and said his name. A burning circle appeared on his arm, perfectly centered. Mason Alvarez worked quiet nights for the Nye County Sheriff's Office. Tonopah's highway miles felt endless, empty, and too exposed. Calls were usually stranded cars, drunk drivers, and lost tourists. This winter, the calls started clustering around one stretch. Mile numbers repeated, and witnesses repeated the same fear. Mason kept logs because memory felt unreliable out there. Mason arrived to mile 112 and found the car already defeated. No hazards blinked, no interior light glowed, no phone screen lit. The driver stood outside, breathing hard, eyes fixed above the roofline. She kept repeating the same detail, a white ring hovering above her roof. She described a low hum that pressed into her ribs, then her phone died. She said the engine died next, perfectly clean, like a switch. Mason stepped closer and felt the air change around the vehicle. His radio clicked, then fell into blank silence. His flashlight beam hit the ring's underside and curved away. The ring was bright, yet the ground beneath stayed dark. No spill, no reflection, no shadow, just a bright shape refusing physics. The ring slid sideways without drifting, perfectly level in wind. Concentric shapes flickered inside it, rotating like gears made of light. The driver whispered it was watching, not shining. Mason saw frost form along the Civic's windows in thin lines, then vanish. The hum rose until his teeth ached, then dropped in one clean beat. The ring snapped upward and vanished without trail or sound. The Civic restarted instantly, like power returned from a hidden hand. Mason inspected the roof and found a perfect circle imprint. Concentric bands looked machined, too sharp for heat damage. The metal stayed warm in freezing air, as if it remembered contact. Tire marks nearby looked liquefied into glossy ridges. Gravel had fused into tiny glassy beads near the shoulder. Mason photographed everything, but his images looked hollowed, like detail had been scraped away. He tried filming the roof, and the screen turned black mid-frame. He wrote a report with only hard facts, then sealed the evidence. The next nights turned the corridor into a pattern. Mason started patrolling mile 110 through mile 114 in slow loops. He stopped relying on electronics and carried paper notes. He marked every report time by wristwatch, then compared it later. Drivers called in with the same fear, but different shapes. Some saw rings hovering inches above asphalt. Some saw discs holding position beyond the median. Some saw paired lights moving like mirrored twins. Mason began seeing the lights himself, distant at first, then closer. They held position for minutes, then jumped without travel, like frames missing. His cruiser clock froze, then caught up in a stutter. His radio produced not static, but counted silence, a pulse that felt deliberate. One night, 3 rings aligned above Highway 95 and blinked in sequence. A 4th ring rose from the desert floor and joined them with perfect spacing. They glided along the corridor like they were reading mile markers. Mason watched them pause over certain points, then drift on again. The ground beneath stayed dark, denying any reflection. The hum returned whenever they stopped, pressing behind his eyes. Mason found small physical hints afterward, warm spots in gravel, thin glassy patches, concentric scuffs on metal guardrail posts. None of it looked like fire or impact. It looked like precision contact. He started leaving a small stone at each warm spot, then returned later to find stones moved. Not thrown, not scattered, just shifted into faint arcs. The corridor no longer felt random. It felt surveyed, measured, and revisited. Near midnight on a later loop, a disc crossed low over the asphalt and stopped above the shoulder. A ring detached and hovered near Mason's hood. Inside it, a tall silhouette appeared for a second, then blurred, then appeared again, as if the air could not decide. Mason felt his breath shorten without effort. The silhouette moved with smooth, economical motion, like it knew exactly where to stand. The ring brightened once, dimmed once, like a breath. Then the disc lifted and vanished, taking the hum with it. Mason realized the corridor was not being haunted. It was being worked. On January 24th, Mason drove the corridor alone again. The air thickened, like a storm without wind. His dash clock froze, then jumped backward twice. His radio clicked, went dead, returned mute, then died again. The hum arrived heavy and close, pressing into his ribs. Headlights dimmed, recovered, dimmed again. A disc formed beside the highway, matching his speed precisely. Its surface looked like liquid metal holding a rigid shape. No seams showed, and no heat shimmer appeared. A white ring detached and hovered near his window, perfectly steady. Inside the ring, an alien silhouette became distinct, then stepped forward without touching ground. The alien looked tall, thin, and unnaturally balanced. Its head was elongated and smooth with black almond eyes. Its mouth was a thin line, almost absent. Its fingers were long and jointed, too many angles for comfort. The cabin temperature dropped sharply, and Mason's muscles stiffened. His hands locked on the wheel, his jaw clenched, his voice failed. An alien voice entered his skull, calm and exact. It said Mason Alvarez without hesitation, then called him a witness. It said he was recorded, like a label being applied. The alien raised a hand toward the windshield. Frost-like symbols flashed across the glass, then vanished. Mason saw images flood behind his eyes, grids of light over desert, rings hovering over roads, people standing still under bright circles. He saw multiple aliens moving between them with careful, indifferent motion. He saw the corridor drawn like a map, then folded like paper. Time began skipping in chunks around the cruiser. Headlights appeared behind him, vanished, returned closer, vanished again. The disc paced him through each skip without effort. The ring hovered above his hood, perfectly centered, as if aligning. The alien leaned closer, studying his face like a specimen. Heat bloomed across Mason's left forearm. A concentric target mark formed, red and centered, the skin around it tight and hot. The alien voice repeated one word, recorded, like confirming a file name. Then the ring brightened hard and the hum peaked. Mason felt pain spike behind his eyes and down his spine, sharp and electrical. The world went thin for a moment, like it lost depth. When the pressure dropped, the disc was gone. The highway looked normal again, but Mason's hands still trembled. His dash clock had advanced farther than it should have. His patrol route line on paper no longer matched the mile signs he remembered. Later, unmarked vehicles arrived without introductions. They handled the corridor like a known procedure, walking straight to the warm spots, pointing without speaking. They tried fitting a wrist device onto Mason's arm, calling it monitoring. Mason refused, and the refusal felt meaningless. That night, 8 discs returned in a rigid grid above the corridor. Multiple rings hovered at equal spacing overhead. Several alien silhouettes appeared inside separate rings, watching him in silence. Their voices overlapped inside Mason's skull, sharp and synchronized, accusing and precise. A blue beam struck the wrist device and melted it instantly. The beam never touched Mason's skin, only the device, as if correcting ownership. The grid lifted and vanished, leaving ozone and a deeper silence than before. Mason quit soon after and stopped sleeping in full cycles. He still hears the hum during empty road drives. What does a witness become after an alien records them? Comment your theory, then like and subscribe. Ethan watched the hotel clocks jump backward while the ocean lights vanished. The researcher video kept recording, but the timestamp rewound mid-shot. Then the bay went silent, like time held its breath. Ethan Rowe works maintenance at Channel House, a cliffside hotel at Depot Bay, Oregon. He fixes boilers, generators, and old wiring. He trusts what he can test. A paranormal researcher rents a room for one reason: UFO lights over the water. She asks Ethan about orange glows offshore and time drift. Ethan admits something from 2 weeks ago. He saw an orange light, then office clocks ran 20 minutes behind his phone. Thursday night, November 12th, fog smothers the bay. The cliff disappears behind gray. Salt air clings to every window. Hallway bulbs begin to flicker in slow waves. Not like a short circuit, more like a pulse moving room to room. Ethan walks the service corridor listening. He checks the main panel first. No breakers are tripped. The voltage meter looks steady, yet the lights still breathe brighter than dim. He tests outlets with a plug tester. Each outlet reads hot and normal. He checks the kitchen line next. The ovens stay powered. The lobby chandelier trembles with a faint hum. It feels below hearing. Ethan feels it in his teeth. The researcher calls him to the oceanside windows. An orange orb hangs above the water. It is bright but casts no reflection. The waves stay black. Two white lights appear beside it. They lock into a perfect triangle. The formation holds perfectly still. Ethan looks down at the beach. No glow touches the sand. Even the fog stays unlit. He runs to the generator room. The generator is off and silent. The fuel gauge reads half. The starter switch does nothing. Yet the entire hotel still has power. Every hallway lamp stays lit. The elevator buttons still glow. Ethan checks the transfer switch. It should be locked to utility. The indicator lights show impossible overlap. A low-frequency engine sound rolls through the walls. It lasts 3 seconds. Then it stops mid-note. Darkness swallows everything for 1 second. Not just lights. Even exit signs vanish. When light returns, the fog looks thinner. The orange orb is gone. The triangle lights are gone too. Ethan checks every clock he can find. His watch reads 9:45. The lobby clock reads 9:25. Every wall clock matches 9:25. The researcher phone matches 9:25. A phone video kept recording the whole time. It contains 20 seconds of static. The timestamp jumps backward mid-shot. It goes from 9:44 to 9:25 in one cut. The camera angle never changes. The clip never stops. Ethan tries to pull security footage. The recorder shows a blank gap. The gap length keeps changing. He walks outside to breathe. The bay is silent. Even the waves sound far away. Sunday night arrives quiet and clear, then fog returns fast. It rolls in like a curtain. Ethan stays near the cliff windows. Lights appear again over the water. This time they have color, blue, red, and green. They spin in a wide ring above the bay. The colors smear through the fog. The air feels charged. Ethan checks the lobby speakers. No music plays, yet a faint tone rides the air. At the center of the ring, a dark gap opens. It looks like a hole in reality. Fog edges curl toward it. Something huge slides out of that gap. A triangular craft about 50 feet wide. It makes no engine sound. The craft holds position over the water. Its underside shows faint lines. The lines shift like slow circuitry. A white beam drops from the craft. It touches the sea without splashing. The water rises upward along it. The ocean lifts like a column pulled by invisible hands. It flows into the craft, steady and wrong. A sharp screech fills the air, then the skull. Ethan grips the counter to stand. The researcher covers her ears. The fog vibrates around the beam. Windows shiver in their frames. Ethan tastes metal on his tongue. Then the world goes dark for 20 seconds. Not a blackout, a full absence. Ethan counts breaths to stay calm. He keeps his eyes forward. He refuses to look up. When light returns, the ring is gone. The craft is gone. The water drops back with delayed ripples. The researcher checks her watch and gasps. Her clock jumped back 15 minutes. Ethan checks his watch again. It disagrees with the hotel clocks now. The drift is smaller but real. The phone video shows another static band. The audio holds only a deep echo. It sounds like distance collapsing. It repeats without rhythm. Then it stops. Ethan walks the hallways afterward. Everything feels too quiet. Even footsteps sound muffled. Monday night is the last night of the stay. Fog returns early and thick. It presses against the cliff windows like a living wall. The hotel feels suspended above a void. Ethan checks the generator again. It still refuses to start. The starter clicks once, then locks. A low vibration travels through the pipes, stronger than before. It feels like a note building under the floor. At 11:12, the fog over the bay tears open in a perfect arc. A huge black object slides through that opening. It is not a plane. It is not a helicopter. It is a massive disc, maybe a sphere, nearly 100 feet across. It glides without wobble or sound. The first sign is the shadow. It arrives like a tide, pouring over the glass. The lobby lamps do not fail. They are simply overpowered by a growing dark. Colors drain from the room. Skin tones turn gray. The edges of furniture lose contrast. Outside, the bay becomes an eclipse, not a blackout, a moving occlusion. The object covers the sky in a clean shape. The fog turns into a dim bowl. The water surface loses its shimmer. The sound of waves drops away, as if the ocean is muted. Ethan feels the temperature fall in seconds. Air pressure pushes into his ears. His eyes widen without choice, hunting for light that is no longer there. A thin ring of light blooms around the object, bright and clean, like a corona. It is too sharp for fog. The ring does not flicker. It holds steady, outlining the craft with a perfect halo. The halo paints the fog in a strange twilight. The bay glows at the edges while the center stays black. It looks like dawn and midnight at once. The eclipse deepens. The room is dark enough to hide faces. Ethan can still see the halo outside, hanging over the water like a silent sun. Then the sea reacts. Offshore, the water lifts in slow sheets, rising and hanging mid-air as if gravity is paused. A spray of droplets freezes around the lifted surface, glittering in the ring light. The hotel windows begin to vibrate. Glass sings without breaking. The vibration climbs into Ethan's teeth and skull until he tastes metal. In the center of the bay, a seam appears, a straight line in the dark air. It opens like a door turning sideways. Behind it, depth does not match the horizon. It looks layered, stacked, too far and too close. Small lights appear inside that depth, then multiply. They stop in perfect positions, as if placed on a grid. The halo stays fixed around the main object, steady as a rule. The disk hums once, low and absolute. The hum ends, and the eclipse collapses. When light returns, everything is corrected all at once. Every clock shows the same exact time. Every phone updates without signal. A dead wall clock starts ticking. The generator starts on the first try, smooth and steady, like it was never broken. Ethan checks the security recorder. The missing gaps are gone. Corrupted files play clean. The phone video shows normal fog footage with no static bands. Only their memory holds the drift, the halo, and the lifted sea. Tuesday morning she leaves. Ethan keeps working, but he listens for the hum in every quiet room. Some nights he checks the bay first, then the clocks. If you have ever noticed missing minutes or a sudden time correction, drop your story in the comments, then hit like and subscribe for the next report. Nina replayed the last radio call and heard a pure tone appear after silence. At the final radar point, she found a glassy burn circle with no wreckage anywhere. Footprints walked out of the circle and ended mid-step, like the desert erased the rest. Nina Ellis is an NTSB air accident investigator. She works wreckage, radar tracks, and last calls. On April 9, 2019, a FAA inspector vanished with a Cessna 172 over the Black Rock Desert in Nevada. Search teams found no debris field and no ELT signal. Nina reached Black Rock before sunrise. The desert looked scraped clean by wind. No smoke column marked a crash path. She reviewed radar plots in a dusty trailer. The last return held steady for seconds. Then the target blinked out without drift. She replayed the final radio audio again. A pure tone rose after the last word. It held, perfect and steady, then stopped. At the final coordinate, the ground was wrong. A scorched circle sat in pale playa dust. It measured about 12 feet across. Inside, sand had turned into dark glass. The glass had ripples as if it flowed. Aluminum fragments sat trapped in the glass. They were twisted and half melted. No impact trench surrounded the circle. No skid marks led into it. There was no crater wall. Nina knelt and touched the vitrified edge. It felt smooth and cold. She chipped a sample with a tool. The shard rang with a clean tone. It matched the radio pitch in her head. Footprints began at the circle rim. They walked outward in a straight line. The stride length stayed normal for 10 steps. Then the prints ended mid-step. One heel mark stopped in open dirt. The next toe never formed. Nina widened the search in a slow grid. She found 3 deep impressions nearby. They formed a perfect triangle around the circle. Each impression looked pressed straight down. The edges were sharp and heavy. The spacing felt measured, not accidental. She deployed ground radar across the triangle. A dense anomaly appeared 8 feet below. It sat under the center line of the pattern. She dug with small tools and patience. The sand cooled faster than it should. Her compass needle twitched at each scoop. At last, metal flashed under the dirt. She uncovered a sphere the size of a basketball. Its surface shimmered through shifting colors. The hues moved without any light source. She lifted it and felt disbelief. It was far too light for its size. It felt almost weightless, yet solid. Her phone screen flickered near the sphere. The camera failed to focus on its skin. Audio recorders picked up the pure tone again. Nina wrapped the sphere in cloth and packed it. She labeled the bag as field evidence. Then she heard engines approaching fast. Headlights did not arrive. There were no sirens. The engines came from above. The desert sky dimmed in a clean circle. A huge craft lowered without wind. It hovered over the burn mark in glass. Its underside held faint geometric lines. The pure tone returned, louder now. Nina felt it in her teeth. Dust lifted in a slow ring. Her tools rattled without touching. The sphere reacted inside her bag. It vibrated like a trapped pulse. It rose on its own into open air. Light wrapped around it like a tether. A beam hit the ground beside Nina. The beam had no heat and no glare. It pulled her upward anyway. Her boots left the playa with no jump. Nina fought and grabbed at dirt. Her hands closed on nothing. Air thickened and sound collapsed. Then she was inside the craft. Cold metal walls, white light without fixtures. A humming silence that pressed her thoughts. A tall alien figure approached. Thin limbs, large head, wide black eyes. Its skin held a wet matte sheen. It did not speak aloud. Meaning entered her mind like pressure. They examined her with calm precision. A ring of light scanned her skin. A needle-like tool touched her wrist. Her vision flashed white between breaths. Nina kicked and tore free. She forced her body through a narrow opening. An access panel gave under her shoulder. She crawled into a darker passage. The tone weakened as she moved. She followed airflow to an outer hatch. The hatch opened onto night desert. Nina dropped and ran. The desert looked unreal after the craft. Stars felt too sharp. The air tasted like metal. Nina ran until her lungs burned. A figure walked ahead on the playa. It was the missing pilot. He looked clean and calm. He said, "Stay, it is safer inside." Nina refused and turned away. The tone surged sharp and pure. Her knees buckled without pain. Air thickened around her chest. A shadow covered the playa. The craft was above her again. A beam opened beside her feet. It had no heat, no glare. It pulled her sideways, not upward. Her body slid across sand like it was ice. Her hands clawed but found no grip. The alien figures waited at the beam edge. Tall, thin, silent, large heads, wide black eyes, long fingers with narrow joints. They moved with calm certainty. One hand closed on her forearm, cold, then warm, then numb. Her vision turned white in pulses. The tone locked into a steady note. Nina tried to scream. No sound left her mouth. Her thoughts arrived slow and heavy, like words stuck in syrup. She crossed into the craft again. Cold metal under her back. White light without fixtures. No seams on the walls, only smooth curves and angles. A ring of light formed above her. It spun without visible source. It scanned from head to boots. Each pass made her skin prickle. Each pass made time feel thinner. A thin tool hovered near her eye. It stopped just short of contact. Then meaning pressed into her mind. A question with no voice. Do you understand? Nina fought to move her fingers. She forced one hand into a fist. The ring slowed as if noticing. The aliens did not react outwardly. Their attention felt physical. A panel opened in the wall. A second light poured out. It shaped itself into a grid. The grid settled over her chest. Her heartbeat stuttered under it, then returned in perfect rhythm. Another tool touched her wrist, a pinprick, then pressure. She felt liquid move in her veins. Her skin flashed with faint patterns, geometric lines, then gone. The craft showed her images, not on a screen, inside her mind. The burn circle from above, the triangle impressions, the sphere rising like a signal. The pilot walking, calm and empty. She realized the pilot was bait, a friendly face for the threshold, a voice to keep her inside. The thought made her panic sharpen. The tone changed key, space folded around the room. The walls looked farther away, then closer. Her stomach lifted as if falling, yet her body never moved. The aliens leaned in, their eyes reflected her face. No blink, no expression, only steady observation. Nina felt her memory being sorted. Moments pulled apart like cards. Some were placed back, some were set aside. She tried to hold on to dates. The numbers slipped away. A final scan passed over her forehead. The light lingered there. She smelled ozone. She tasted copper. Then the room dimmed. She woke on the desert floor. Only seconds seemed to pass. Her return felt incomplete, like part of her stayed inside. Her watch showed a different date. Her phone held blank footage. A pale geometric mark sat on her skin. She stood up and felt wrong. Nina returned to the ground, but not to herself. She hears the pure tone in quiet rooms. She loses minutes without moving. Sometimes she wakes with dust on her shoes. If you have a theory about what took her, share it below. Then hit like and subscribe for the next report. A patrol team went out, and the range lost every signal from them at once. Betty White heard the last transmission cut off mid-word, then saw a strange aerial craft hanging low over the desert like it was waiting. Seconds later, the horizon went dark again, and the team did not answer any channel. Betty White was on duty, part of the military machine that relied on schedules, check-ins, and clean logs. She was close enough to the patrol route to see the interruption with her own eyes, and trained enough to understand how wrong it was. That also meant her statement could be controlled from the inside. She said she witnessed the instant the routine shift broke apart. While the range expected predictable risks, her account pointed to something outside procedure, something that arrived with intent, took a person, and left the system scrambling to explain the gap. A scheduled check-in window opened and closed with nothing but carrier hiss. The dispatcher repeated the call immediately and switched channels, while a vehicle on a parallel route was tasked to confirm the patrol corridor by sight. Betty stayed at her post and watched the response tighten. She leaned toward the speaker until her shoulder brushed the console, then straightened and leaned in again, as if the right angle could pull a voice out of the static. Her fingertips tapped the edge of the radio housing once, then went still. She glanced at the wall clock, looked back at the channel indicator, then fixed her eyes on the desert beyond the lights. When the parallel vehicle reported it had visual on the patrol corridor, but no headlights, no movement, no dust plume, Betty's mouth opened as if to speak, then closed. She wrote the time down, underlined it, and pressed the pen hard enough to leave a faint dent in the paper. She adjusted her grip on the strap of her gear until the fabric creaked, released it, then gripped it again. She stepped to the doorway and scanned the route where several sets of boots and one patrol vehicle should have been. The open distance should have made everything obvious. Instead, it made the absence absolute. She swept the horizon left to right, then repeated the motion slower, pausing at the places where shadows pooled. Then, at the far edge of her sight, a shape appeared. It was only a brief presence, a dark form sliding low against the horizon, too smooth to be a truck, and too steady to be a flare. It dipped closer to the ground than any aircraft should, paused without pitching forward, and held there for a heartbeat as if it had locked onto a point. Betty's pen slipped from her fingers and clicked against the notebook cover. A blink later, the shape rose straight up and vanished. The search widened into sectors, then tightened into clusters as the patrol team began to reappear in the wrong places. One was found disoriented miles off route. Another stumbled out of a shallow wash, unable to explain how he got there. Each return sparked a rush of motion that collapsed into confusion the moment anyone tried to rebuild the timeline. Betty moved with the radios at her back and the desert in front of her, notebook pressed to her chest like a brace. Every time a name was called and answered, her face lifted for a fraction of a second. Then the next silence hit, and the lift drained away. There was one name that did not answer: Jonathan. He had only recently become more than a coworker to her, a fragile beginning neither of them had named for long. A hand left on her arm a beat too long, a quiet walk after shift that felt like a promise. The radio silence now felt personal, like the range had reached into her life and pulled something loose. When the search line finally tightened into a circle of headlights and floodlights, the crowd went still in a way that did not need an order. Someone turned away sharply. Someone else stared as if the eyes could not look away. Jonathan was found last. The words used around the perimeter were careful and clipped, but they could not soften what it meant. Betty's breath caught, then broke. She made a sound she did not recognize as her own and stumbled against a vehicle door, fingers scraping for a grip. Her knees buckled and she dropped to the ground, one hand covering her mouth as if that could hold the moment back. Tears came hard and fast, and she did not try to hide them. Around her, people kept moving because the scene demanded motion, but no one met her eyes. She rocked forward once, then twice, staring past boots and shadows to the place where Jonathan lay. as if her mind refused to accept the geometry of it. And behind her, just outside the main spill of light, a tall, slender silhouette stood half concealed in the darkness. Its oversized head angled slightly, as if studying her. No one called it out. No one turned. Betty did not see it. The silhouette lingered for a heartbeat, then slipped back into the black, leaving only the feeling that the night had been watching all along. In the hours that followed, the story began to narrow instead of open. Betty was redirected away from briefings, told to rest, told to sign, told to stop asking for cross-team timelines. Jonathan's name was handled like a hazard. When she tried to connect what she saw at the horizon to what happened to him, the room cooled and the conversation ended. Still, the people closest to the incident kept working. They tried to reconstruct the route, align the clock times, and compare where each member of the team had been found. They gathered radios, checked vehicle logs, and marked the desert corridor again with fresh stakes and tape. However, each time the investigation found traction, something happened. When a technician laid out a clean strip of radio traffic on a reel to log the gaps, a thin fog crept across the table, as if it had spilled from nowhere. It slid over the tape housing, beaded on the plastic, and when it cleared, minutes of audio had been erased. When a map board finally showed a pattern linking the scattered locations, a soft haze pooled in the corners of the board. Pins loosened without hands. A line Betty watched someone draw in dark pencil faded from the paper while the pencil still hovered above it, the graphite lifting away as if the page refused to hold ink. Betty watched these failures stack up from the edges, always close enough to notice the timing, never close enough to be allowed in the center. Grief kept trying to break through her composure. Her pen paused above a line it should have finished. She stared at an empty chair for a second too long before remembering to move. The interference grew bolder. The haze returned in short pulses, threading through floodlight beams like living smoke. Radios dropped at the same moment across multiple channels, then returned with everyone speaking over one another as if the gap never happened. People began to disagree about what they had just done moments earlier. Simple facts softened, then slid. Near the end of the shift, Betty followed a short corridor between vehicles and floodlight poles, trying to find someone willing to answer her questions. Ahead, a cluster of personnel stood over the marked tape line, arguing softly about whether the stakes had been moved. Betty slowed, and the air thickened again, the way it had when the craft dipped at the horizon. A shadow stretched across the sand that did not match any floodlight. She looked up. At the edge of the illuminated perimeter, a full-body figure stood in clear view, tall and slender, with an elongated head and large black almond eyes catching the light. Its pale skin carried a matte, wet sheen, and faint vein-like lines seemed to glow subtly beneath the surface. Long limbs and long fingers hung still at its sides, as if it had stepped out only to be seen. No one around Betty spoke. No one moved. The investigation had been pushed and pulled all night, and now the force behind it stood fully exposed. Betty stared at the alien until the haze folded over it and the perimeter looked empty again. What do you think Betty really witnessed? Comment your theory below, then like and subscribe. In the shadowy depths of the Texas Panhandle, where the wind whispers secrets through endless fields of dry grass, a chilling rumor has haunted the locals for years. It speaks of a young woman, vibrant and full of life, who vanished one fateful evening while jogging down a desolate country road under a starlit sky. Witnesses claim she was pursued by an unidentified object, a glowing orb that descended from the heavens, pulsing with an otherworldly light that silenced the night. As the rumor spreads like wildfire through small-town diners and whispered conversations, some say she was snatched away in a beam of blinding radiance, her screams echoing into oblivion. But what if the truth is darker, a cosmic abduction that defies explanation, leaving only questions and fear in its wake? This is the story of a young girl disappear in a shining light from the sky, and only one person knows what actually happened. In 2007, Emily relocated to a quiet rural community in the Texas Panhandle alongside her former partner and his relatives. With no family of her own in the area and few acquaintances beyond his circle, she felt isolated at first. That changed when she struck up a conversation with her neighbor, Sophia, a woman roughly her age who shared similar interests. including fitness and motherhood, as Sophia had a young son. The two women bonded swiftly, forming a close friendship. Sophia, a slender and energetic Latina with a passion for jogging and workouts, maintained a strict daily routine. She would lace up her shoes and head out for a run along the deserted old country road at precisely 6 p.m., returning home by 7 p.m. without fail. The road was typically serene, with minimal traffic, making it an ideal path for her evening exercise. About 6 months after Emily's arrival, around March 2008, Sophia started mentioning peculiar lights she had spotted in a patch of woods opposite their homes. For over a week, she claimed, these lights would materialize one after another during her runs, hovering motionless before gradually dimming and vanishing into the night. Intrigued by the story, Emily, who had a keen interest in the supernatural and spent her free time delving into paranormal research, offered to join Sophia on her next outing to witness the phenomenon firsthand. However, just as they prepared to leave, Emily received an urgent call from her boyfriend about a car breakdown on a distant road, forcing her to rush off and assist him. She apologized to Sophia, promising to accompany her another time, and left in haste. Sophia proceeded with her run alone, undeterred. Emily returned home after roughly an hour, only to find Sophia sitting on her porch, her usually olive-toned skin drained of color, appearing ghostly pale. Concerned, Emily hurried over and inquired what had happened. Sophia, still shaken, whispered that one of them had pursued her, a UFO from the cluster of lights. Emily sat beside her as Sophia recounted the terrifying ordeal. Midway through her jog, the lights had reappeared as usual. Eager to capture evidence for Emily, Sophia pulled out her fully charged phone and snapped a few photos. But inexplicably, the device shut down after 3 shots, leaving her frustrated. When she glanced back, the lights had drawn nearer, no longer stationary. Panicking, she turned to sprint home, but one orb detached from the group and veered toward her. Sophia dove into a nearby thicket of overgrown shrubs for cover, her heart pounding as the light passed overhead and then faded away. She bolted back to her house, vowing to avoid the road for a while. For nearly a month, Sophia steered clear of her runs, haunted by the memory. Eventually, she convinced herself it was an overreaction, perhaps just distant aircraft or a trick of the eye, and resolved to resume her routine. She invited Emily to join her for safety, but Emily declined, citing fatigue from a long day. In hindsight, Emily often reflected on how fortunate that decision might have been. Sophia waved goodbye, assuring Emily she'd return shortly. Mere minutes after Sophia departed, Emily noticed brilliant flashes streaking past her window, illuminating the drawn curtains. Assuming it was Sophia's sister arriving early for a planned shopping trip, Emily dismissed it and continued her evening. 20 minutes later, Emily stepped outside for a quick break, lighting a cigarette under the starry sky. That's when she saw them, 3 luminous orbs hovering low over the field directly across from her house. They bobbed gently near the ground, emitting a soft glow that captivated her. Excited, Emily thought of sharing the sighting with Sophia upon her return. The lights lingered for what felt like an eternity, perhaps 45 minutes, before suddenly rocketing upward and dissolving into the darkness. Coincidentally, at that exact moment, Sophia's sister pulled into the driveway. She knocked on Sophia's door, but there was no response. Venturing inside to check, she found the house empty. Emerging puzzled, she confided in Emily, who suggested Sophia might still be out jogging and would appear soon. They waited together, chatting idly at first, but as minutes stretched into hours, worry set in. Sophia never returned. Hours morphed into days, days into weeks, and weeks into months, with no trace of her. Despite exhaustive searches involving local authorities, volunteers, and even aerial surveys of the surrounding woods and fields, Sophia remained missing. The community buzzed with theories. Some whispered of foul play by a stranger passing through the sparse traffic. Others speculated about an accident in the underbrush, but no evidence surfaced. Emily, tormented by guilt for not accompanying her friend, replayed the events endlessly in her mind. She couldn't shake the connection to those eerie lights, especially after Sophia's earlier encounter. The orbs Emily had witnessed that fateful night seemed too coincidental, too ominous. Years later, Emily still pondered Sophia's fate, wondering if the lights were linked to her disappearance. Perhaps they were extraterrestrial probes, as some paranormal enthusiasts suggested, or advanced drones from a nearby military base. Rumors of secret testing in the Panhandle circulated among locals. Sophia's fear during her initial sighting now haunted Emily, prompting her to question if her vibrant friend had been abducted, harmed, or simply vanished into thin air like so many unsolved cases. The phone photos Sophia attempted were lost with her dead device, leaving no proof. Emily shared the story anonymously in online forums, hoping for closure, but it only amplified her unease. To this day, Sophia's name lingers on missing persons lists, a stark reminder of that quiet Texas road and the mysteries it holds. Reflecting on the broader implications, Emily considered how such incidents might tie into larger patterns of unexplained phenomena reported across rural America. She delved deeper into research, uncovering similar accounts of glowing orbs pursuing joggers or hikers in isolated areas, some ending in vanishings without resolution. In one altered recollection, Emily imagined Sophia's son growing up without answers, fueling her resolve to advocate for better search protocols in remote towns. The friendship they shared, built on shared laughs and evening chats, now served as a bittersweet memory. Emily moved away eventually, but the Panhandle's vast skies still evoked chills whenever she visited. The lights, whatever their origin, had forever altered her perception of the ordinary, turning a simple run into an enigma that echoed through time. The forest at night absorbs sound like a living creature. Inside the Apache Sitgreaves woods, darkness settles between the pines and presses against anything that enters its territory. On November 5, 1975, 7 loggers finished their work as the sun dipped behind the trees. Exhausted and ready to head home, they climbed into their battered pickup truck and began the long drive down the forest road. Travis Walton, the youngest of the crew, watched the treetops pass by outside the window. He was 22, fueled by stubborn courage, the kind of youth who understood danger but believed it always belonged to someone else. Halfway down the road, the men noticed a strange light between the trees. It flickered with an intensity that did not belong to headlights, campfires, or moonlight. The driver instinctively eased off the gas. Something in that light felt wrong, almost invasive, as if it had been waiting for them. The truck rolled forward until the trees opened into a clearing. Hovering above the ground was a disc-shaped craft, perfectly curved and polished like metal dipped in sunlight. A warm amber glow pulsed along its underside, brightening and dimming as though the craft had a heartbeat. Travis felt a magnetic pull, a mixture of fear and wonder tightening in his chest. Before anyone could speak, he pushed open the door and stepped out. "Travis, stop!" Mike Rogers shouted from the driver's seat. But Travis continued walking toward the craft. The air around him vibrated gently, as though an invisible force surrounded the clearing. The craft lowered itself with a slow, deliberate movement. Travis stood directly beneath it, head tilted back, hands slightly raised. A sudden blast of blue and gold light erupted from the underside of the object. The beam struck Travis in the chest and lifted him off the ground. His body flew through the air before crashing onto the forest floor. His limbs went limp and he did not move. The men in the truck screamed. Panic struck them like a physical blow. Mike slammed his foot onto the accelerator, and the truck bounced violently over rocks and roots as they tore down the road. Their voices overlapped in terror, each of them convinced that Travis had been killed. After several minutes of frantic driving, the terror softened into guilt. They argued, shaking, until the only decision left was to return. When they reached the clearing again, both Travis and the craft had vanished. The air was still and empty, leaving no trace that anything extraordinary had occurred. Search teams and deputies flooded the area. The sheriff questioned each crew member. The story they told was outrageous, yet their fear was real. Investigators combed the woods. They found no tracks, no blood, no evidence that Travis had run away or been attacked by wildlife. On the 3rd day of the search, the sheriff demanded that the remaining 6 loggers submit to polygraph tests. 5 passed. 1 was inconclusive due to stress, but none failed. The examiner concluded that the men believed what they had seen. The world wanted an explanation. Newspapers mocked them. Residents whispered about murder. Others claimed fame or money was their motive. But even the skeptics could not explain what happened 5 days later. Shortly after midnight, in a quiet phone booth at a gas station, a call came through. A trembling voice on the other end whispered, "It's me. They took me. Please, come get me." When Mike arrived at the station, he found Travis curled on the tile floor. His face was gaunt, his beard had grown, and his clothes hung loosely as if the week had drained him. His eyes reflected terror that words could not express. At first, Travis could remember only flashes, a blinding white light, a cold surface beneath his back, a feeling of being watched. Slowly, the fragments formed into memory. Travis woke inside a curved room made of seamless metal. A bright light hovered over his chest. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy and numb. 3 small figures stood beside the table. Their skin was pale and smooth like clay. Their heads were too large for their bodies, and their wide brown eyes reflected the overhead light. They had no hair, no eyebrows, no expression. Travis pushed himself upward, grabbed a cylindrical object from a nearby tray, and swung wildly. The beings did not attack. They simply stepped back and left the room without a sound. Travis stumbled down a narrow corridor and entered a larger chamber. A transparent display of stars rotated around him, forming a 3-dimensional map of space. A tall figure entered behind him. This being resembled a human far more closely than the others, with flawless skin and perfect symmetry. It wore a fitted blue uniform and a transparent helmet. Travis begged for answers, voice shaking. The figure remained silent but gestured for him to follow. In a different room, a reclining chair waited. The tall being guided him into the seat. A mask descended toward his face. Darkness swept over him. When Travis opened his eyes again, he was lying on the side of a highway. The night wind scraped against his skin. A disc floated silently overhead for a brief moment and then shot into the sky with impossible speed. Travis had returned, but something inside him had not. The world exploded with accusations. Skeptics suggested he had staged the disappearance to avoid financial penalties on his logging contract or to push a sensational story into the newspapers. Others insisted he had hidden at a friend's house for 5 days. But no skeptic could explain the sudden weight loss, the dehydration, the mental disorientation, or why 6 eyewitnesses passed lie detector tests. Hollywood turned the story into a film titled Fire in the Sky, though Travis later said the real events were far more terrifying. He described the moment he understood what frightened him most. It was not the UFO, it was not the creatures or the machinery, it was the realization that to them, he was not a person. "I felt like an object," he said, "something to be examined." Travis Walton never asked to become a symbol. He wanted an ordinary life in an ordinary town. But for 5 days in 1975, the universe reminded him that if something beyond us wants to take a human being, it does not need permission. The forest was silent that night, but something in the dark was listening. "I fear for my kids and everybody else's kids." Jim Sparks did not say that after a nightmare. He said it after decades of being taken from his bed, paralyzed on a freezing table, and used like genetic livestock by something that does not see us as people. Tonight, we are not asking if alien abductions are real. We are asking a harder question. What if the most terrifying part is that they see themselves as the caretakers, and we are the failing herd? Jim Sparks survived decades of this. Most abductees talk about fragments, flashes of light, missing time, pieces of memory that feel like dreams. Jim was different. He claimed to be 95% consciously aware during his encounters. For him, the abductions were not hazy nightmares he could dismiss afterward. They were events he was forced to live through, awake, trapped again and again. That awareness was not a gift, it was a curse. He began like anyone else, a regular guy from a regular town, worrying about bills, work, and the future. But at night, when the world went quiet and soft, another reality opened around him. It always began with the cold. He felt the entities before he saw them, a chill that did not stop at the skin but slid straight into the bones. It was not a draft or the bite of winter air. It was a deep, invasive cold that made his skeleton feel hollow and his blood thick, as if his body was being prepared for something he did not want to understand. Then the Greys appeared. Jim never described them like the cartoon images on t-shirts. They were not goofy little green men. They were small and slender, but disturbingly fragile, like porcelain figures that should shatter with one touch, except they did not. They could restrain a grown man without effort. Their arms were thin, and their long fingers moved with surgical precision, every gesture controlled and efficient. They did not walk, they glided. Every movement was frictionless and stripped of human rhythm, no sway of the shoulders, no shift of weight, no wasted motion. They slid across the room as if the floor was optional and gravity was only a suggestion. Watching them felt like watching an animation that did not match the physics of the rest of the world. Your eyes could follow it, but your brain kept rejecting it. For Jim, leaving his home felt like disintegration. His body did not hurt, it simply stopped feeling like a body. His nerves went silent as if someone had thrown a hidden switch. 1 second, there was a bedroom, night air, and the distant sound of the highway. The next second, nothing felt familiar. The house, the neighborhood, even the idea of home turned thin and false, peeling away like a stage backdrop. The final surge before arrival was worse than physical pain. He felt as if something was scooping up his sense of self and stretching it across an invisible distance, thinning it out until it almost snapped. In that instant, he understood that whatever held him had total control. For these beings, time and space were not barriers. They were materials. Jim would awaken on the table. The cold there was different, predatory. It did not just make him shiver. It seemed to drain heat out of his organs, as if the room itself was feeding on his warmth. His body felt like an object someone had left in a freezer and forgotten. The room around him was built for dread. The walls were smooth and seamless, glowing softly with no visible light source. No lamps, no panels, no shadows. Perspective never felt stable, as if the space shifted just outside his line of sight. There were no corners, no familiar edges his mind could grab onto. It felt less like a room and more like the inside of an idea. Waiting in that impossible chamber were those he would come to call the keepers. Not just aliens. Keepers, as if humanity were livestock and they were the handlers. Their skin was pale and nearly translucent, stretched tight over thin bird-like bones. They looked fragile, but when they touched him, their grip was absolute. They were walking contradictions, frail yet overpowering, small yet dominating, silent yet deafening inside his mind. And then there were their eyes. They were not just big and black. They were polished voids, wet and glassy, reflecting warped versions of the room and of Jim himself. Looking into them was not like meeting a gaze. It was like staring down a bottomless shaft. There was no recognition, no sympathy, no emotion of any kind that he could relate to anything human. They were alive, but they felt like tools. The air shook with a low subsonic vibration, the pulse of the craft. It was not loud, but Jim felt it in his chest, his stomach, along his spine. It made his insides buzz as if the sound had been tuned to him. He lay pinned between the frozen table and the indifferent machinery above, caught in a geometry that did not care whether he lived or died. The procedures were clinical and efficient, soaked in a kind of terror that went beyond pain. The scanning did not feel like a medical test. It felt like a break-in. Jim felt an intelligence pushing through him, rifling through his thoughts, memories, fears, and secrets the way someone might sort through files on a stolen hard drive. His mind did not feel like his own. Instruments appeared around him, thin needle-like devices glowing with a faint, unsettling light. They were not hanging from arms or cables. They simply appeared, as if wanting them there was enough. Jim stayed conscious as the keepers removed what he believed was his most fundamental biological material. His reproductive capacity, his genetic future, reduced to samples taken with calm precision. There was no anger in their movements, no hatred, no thrill. That was the worst part. This was not torture. Torture requires emotion, rage, cruelty, or the desire to dominate. What they did to him did not need any of that. It was colder than hate. It was farming. His body was not being punished. It was being used, treated as a resource, a tank of raw material that a program could tap again and again as long as the unit stayed alive and functional. Whether he screamed, begged, or prayed did not matter. His reactions meant nothing. In that realization, Jim's life split in two. He was no longer just a man on Earth. He was a genetic asset, a slave. The last phase of each encounter was what he called the steering procedure, a telepathic attack that made the physical violations feel almost simple. When one of the Greys fixed its eyes on him, the room fell away. No walls, no table, no ship. Only pressure, a brutal expansion behind his temples, as if invisible hands were pushing his skull outward from the inside. Information did not drift into his mind. It slammed in. Jim described it as a high-speed torrent, a flood of images, symbols, emotions, and concepts forced into his awareness all at once. There was no time to filter, no option to look away. His own thoughts were pushed to the edges to make room. In those flashes, he saw Earth dying. He saw skies thick with toxins, oceans drained of life, forests reduced to black stumps. He saw cities failing under their own weight, not because of dramatic alien attacks, but because of neglect, greed, and decay. Humanity was not being conquered on a battlefield. It was wearing itself out. He also saw them, hybrids, beings that looked almost human, but not quite. Children with pale skin, enormous dark eyes, and unnaturally calm faces. Too quiet, too still. Riding buses, walking through crowds, sitting in classrooms, watching. Through it all, he felt one message pressed into his mind. Not spoken, but etched there with absolute certainty. Your species is unfit. Your environment is now our primary concern. Later, when he tried to put it into simple human terms, Jim said that it was a high-speed torrent, a deluge of symbols and images, and that they did not ask him to understand. They forced him to know that humanity was unfit and that the planet had become their main concern. To him, that was the final horror. The beings who froze his body, scraped his genetics, and tore through his mind did not see themselves as invaders or monsters. They saw themselves as custodians, caretakers of a failing world, and we were the species they intended to manage. After years of Jim's clear, consistent testimony, the usual scientific explanations start to feel less like answers and more like defense mechanisms. Skeptics often reach first for sleep paralysis. Psychologist Susan Clancy and others say abductions come from a REM glitch. The brain wakes up, the body stays frozen, you sense a presence, feel a weight on your chest, panic, and in a culture full of UFOs, your mind fills the gap with grays and ships. It is tidy and comforting. But sleep paralysis is brief and chaotic. Jim's encounters were structured, repeated over decades, with detailed ship layouts, roles, and procedures. Calling that a simple brain spasm feels more like emotional protection than serious science. The God helmet offers another answer. Dr. Death Michael Persinger showed that magnetic stimulation of the temporal lobes can create a feeling of a presence. Yet to use this as a full explanation, you must believe thousands of unrelated people are somehow generating almost the same story. The same grays, rooms, harvesting, hybrids. The question is not whether Jim Sparks is crazy. The question is much worse. When the paralysis hits you one night, when the air trembles, when the room starts to bend and your body refuses to move, will you tell yourself it was just a dream, or will you realize you were never alone in that room at all? If you have ever felt that presence at the edge of your bed, if you have ever woken up frozen with a weight on your chest, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me honestly, was it sleep paralysis, psychology, or something else watching you in the dark? If this story unsettled you, make sure you like this video so it reaches more people, subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss the next case, and share it with someone who always says, "I do not believe in aliens," and see if they still sleep as well tonight. Because if Jim Sparks is telling the truth, this is not just his story. It might be a warning meant for you. Listen, the wind is still, the dogs are restless, your cattle are uneasy. If you don't check now, it might be too late. On a cold, silent morning, a rancher found one of his cows lying alone in the back field. At first glance, it seemed routine, but the absence of tracks, disturbed soil, or nervous herd told another story. The air was heavy, the silence hollow, and a faint metallic smell lingered. At a glance, the cow appears mostly intact. No huge chunks are missing, no shredded flesh, no signs of a predator. But the head tells a different story. The jawline stripped of flesh in a neat, curved band, one eye socket perfectly empty, the ear gone as if removed with a single, precise motion. The openings are smooth, almost polished. He searches for blood. A cow carries gallons of it. Predators kill messily. Bullets or gut wounds leave puddles. Here there is none. No stains, no seepage, the hide dry, the exposed tissue strangely bloodless, emptied rather than opened. A veterinarian arrives. He has seen coyotes tear livestock, diseased waste animals, and bodies left in the sun. This is different. The cuts are smooth, the work of an instrument or an intelligence beyond human skill. Certain organs are gone, removed rather than torn. Capillaries look drained. Fractures in the legs and ribs suggest impact injuries, not simple collapse. And yet, the ground is flat. No sign of struggle, no evidence that anything could have moved the animal. If it was moved, how? A cow doesn't float, it doesn't teleport. And still, the body, the wounds, the empty space whisper the same impossible suggestion. It was taken, worked on, and returned, altered by some unseen hand. Word spreads quickly in the rural community. Another dead cow might have been ignored, but this one is different. The sheriff's department sends a deputy, the vet files his report, and soon an independent investigator arrives, someone who has spent years chasing patterns most would rather ignore. He has seen this scene before: bloodless carcasses, surgical cuts, empty ground. He isn't here to dismiss it. The three men walk the field. The deputy searches for human evidence: cigarette butts, footprints, tire tracks. He finds nothing. The vet looks for natural causes: disease, injury, and predators. The body yields no answers. The investigator searches for repetition, signature, the invisible fingerprints of an intelligence that leaves no trace. He asks questions that make the others uneasy: strange lights in the sky, humming noises at night, animals acting strangely. Stories emerge. The rancher admits the dogs were restless the night before, pacing and whining for no reason. A neighbor says she awoke at 2 a.m. to a soft white glow in her bedroom. Pulling back the curtain, she saw a round, silent light hovering over the fields. After a minute, it dimmed and vanished. Predators leave ragged wounds and tracks, not surgical precision or total bloodlessness. Humans, even the most careful, leave evidence: footprints, tire marks, but none exist here. This case matches others in different counties, states, and years. To blame humans requires believing in a secret operation with perfect stealth, advanced tools, and no explainable motive. Natural explanations fail. Fractures suggest a fall. Blood is completely absent, even when soil is tested. Certain organs are consistently missing and cuts are precise. Ranchers swear the animals were healthy hours before. Each normal explanation covers only one detail and collapses against the others. As night falls, the three men sense the same invisible wall. Something happened here that defies conventional reasoning. No tracks, no blood, only fleeting lights and eerie stillness. An intelligence acting with precision and disappearing without a trace. The investigator notes anomalies: flattened grass, disturbed soil, and quiet that feels alive. The event seems sudden, surgical, and observed from afar. The pattern repeats across time and distance, consistent and deliberate. It points not to nature, not to humans, but to something else entirely, something precise, deliberate, untraceable. By the night's end, reports are filed, notes added, but the mystery remains. The signature of the act, the precision, the lack of evidence, the recurring pattern, resists explanation. Only one conclusion seems to fit. An intelligence moves silently, strikes surgically, and vanishes, leaving the impossible for the world to puzzle over. At some point, usually when the recorder is off or the camera isn't rolling, someone finally says what nobody wants to admit. What if the animal wasn't killed here at all? What if it was taken? The idea feels absurd, especially in daylight, in front of adults with jobs and reputations. Yet the facts line up: broken bones like a fall, a bloodless body, surgical cuts, untouched ground. It makes the most physical sense, even if the least emotional sense. In the deep hours of the night, a silent light descends over the field. The cow is lifted, not dragged into the air. No marks, no struggle, no tracks. It is brought inside something, call it a craft, a machine, a lab, that doesn't care about our words for it. Inside, there is no ritual, no candles, no chance. There is a procedure: bright, harsh light, smooth, cold surfaces, instruments that cut tissue without tearing, remove organs without splashing, and extract blood completely. The animal is not a victim in a horror story. It is a specimen, a data point, a sample. When the procedure is finished, the body is returned, not placed gently, but dropped from a height, enough to fracture bones, not enough to scatter the carcass. Whatever life remained, if any, is gone. By sunrise, all that's left is a circle of untouched earth with a dead, altered animal at its center. The only signs of anything unnatural are the body itself and the rare stories of people who admit seeing something strange in the sky. If this had happened once, it could be dismissed as an anomaly, but it hasn't. Investigators who track these cases maintain maps most people never see, pinboards and databases filled with mutilations from ranches across the country and beyond. Different owners, breeds, and landscapes, yet the same story. Bloodless carcasses, precise cuts, missing eyes and organs, no tracks. Years apart, states apart, yet eerily alike. The pattern doesn't look random, it looks systematic, like a program running quietly in the background of rural life, ignored by those unwilling to consider that the operating system might not be entirely human. Eventually, the mutilated cow is hauled away. The rancher still has to feed the rest of his herd. Bills still come. The world doesn't stop just because something impossible happened in a field. The sheriff files it as unexplained. The vet hides behind careful wording. The investigator adds one more pin to his map and drives off, knowing this exact scene has played out before, in another county, another year. Officially, nothing has been proven. Unofficially, nothing has been disproven either. But for the people who stood over that body, it never really ends. The rancher can't walk that patch of ground without seeing the clean circle of dirt and that empty socket where an eye should be. The neighbor who saw the hovering light now double-checks the sky before she closes her curtains. The investigator stares at his map at night and realizes the pattern doesn't look random anymore. Do you watch your herd closely at night? Comment below if you've ever seen something unexplainable. That night, Belgium realized something terrifying. If that craft wanted to attack, there was nothing on Earth that could have stopped it. Tonight, we delve once more into the archives of the Black Vault, the world's largest civilian repository of declassified U.S. government documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. The account we trace is sourced exclusively from official gendarmerie reports, Belgian air component summaries, and intercept radar logs, all preserved exactly as they were released. This is a presentation of the factual record as documented by state authorities. The incident known as the Belgian Triangle Wave stands as a paramount example of this documented consistency. It began not with a sensational public claim, but with the quiet, professional observation of two uniformed officers fulfilling a routine duty. On the evening of November 29, 1989, under clear skies near Eupen, regional military and civilian flight schedules confirmed no authorized or transponder-equipped aircraft were scheduled to cross the area at low altitude. The conditions were sterile, setting the stage for an encounter that would challenge the capabilities of the nation's air defense system. This event would mark the beginning of a sustained period of unusual activity, compelling the official record keepers to document maneuvers that defied known aerodynamics and propulsion technology. The initial report that catalyzed the entire wave was filed by two officers of the Gendarmerie Nationale, Brigadier Heinrich Nicole and Warrant Officer Huber von Montigny. At approximately 5:15 p.m., while conducting their evening rounds near the Gilp Dam, their attention was drawn to a formation of exceptionally bright, motionless lights hovering silently above the tree line. Their report details a structure of lights arranged in a precise triangular layout, with three brilliant white points defining the vertices and a distinct red pulsating light centered precisely between them. The absolute stillness of the formation was remarkable. In the official gendarmerie report, Brigadier Nicole specifically noted that the lights were steady, bright, fixed, and not behaving like any aircraft known to us. Warrant Officer von Montigny provided an equally crucial detail. The object produced no sound at all, not even the faintest. After their initial observation, the officers watched as the craft began to drift slowly toward the town of Eupen. The speed was meticulously noted as being far slower than a helicopter's minimum forward speed. Yet this movement was achieved with total silence and the complete absence of any visible structural elements beyond the illuminated points. The core anomaly was the object's proven ability to hover for extended periods while maintaining absolute silence and performing slow-speed lateral movements, a performance envelope entirely inconsistent with conventional fixed-wing aircraft of the 1980s. This initial sighting served as the first factual pillar supported by multiple professional accounts. The phenomenon quickly transitioned from a localized police report into a widespread civilian event. By 6 p.m., emergency lines at police posts across the region, including Eupen, Badis, and Limburg, began to be inundated with calls from independent witnesses. The public reports provided striking and immediate consistency with the officer's initial account. Witnesses across diverse locations independently described the same phenomenon: a large, dark triangular craft moving slowly and silently, defined by 3 corner lights and the central red, pulsating light. Multiple callers noted that the lights were so intensely bright that they were capable of illuminating treetops and houses as the silent craft passed directly overhead. The uniformity of the descriptions was a key factor in treating the reports as a single, credible event. Statements later collected by the civilian research organization SOBEPS reinforced this critical factual alignment. Further supporting the physical nature of the object was the testimony of a resident near Badis, whose statement was preserved by SOBES. "I saw the 3 lights perfectly, and between them, a dark shape that blocked the stars." This observation of a physical, opaque structure obscuring the background stars provided visual evidence that the lights were affixed to a massive, low-flying platform. Weather data from the Royal Meteorological Institute of Belgium consistently confirmed clear skies, ruling out any atmospheric conditions capable of producing such large-scale optical illusions. The consistency across thousands of witness testimonies, from professional law enforcement to ordinary citizens, made the Belgian wave an unprecedented subject for official military scrutiny. The phenomenon reached its climax on the night of March 30th, 1990, initiating the phase where the documented visual accounts were merged with verifiable military instrument data. Reports describing the bright, triangular configuration began around 10:30 p.m. At 10:50 p.m., the Gendarmerie contacted the Control Reporting Center Glans, CRC Glans, providing precise coordinates. CRC Glans' primary surveillance radar registered intermittent returns, indicating a possible low-altitude airborne object. Glans immediately notified the Belgian Air Component, which authorized the scramble of 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons from Beauvechain Air Base. At 11:05 p.m., one F-16 successfully achieved a radar lock on the target. The aircraft's flight computer automatically recorded the object's performance envelope, providing objective, indisputable instrument data. The target was recorded accelerating from 150 knots to over 900 knots, approximately 1,036 miles per hour, in a matter of seconds. Following this burst, the object began a rapid descent at a rate exceeding 10,000 feet per minute before abruptly leveling off. The target then initiated a sharp, vertical climb, causing the radar lock to immediately drop due to the extreme change in vector. The F-16 successfully reacquired the target twice more, but each subsequent lock was quickly lost due to similarly abrupt and non-conventional shifts in speed and altitude. These extreme, instantaneous maneuvers, particularly the acceleration and vertical performance, were absolutely incompatible with the known performance profile of any aircraft in the Belgian or NATO inventory at the time. The radar logs from this intercept, now publicly archived within the Black Vault, document abrupt acceleration, rapid altitude shifts, and the persistent absence of transponder signals, all consistent with a genuine, physically present, airborne object executing trans-aerodynamic movements. The F-16s continued to patrol the area, but the pilots were unable to achieve visual confirmation. The physical evidence remained entirely in the instrument data. The investigation phase was concluded with the final report issued by the Belgian Air Component in 1990. Its conclusion regarding the seminal March 30th event was unequivocal. No aircraft, balloon, meteorological device, or known aerial platform could account for the events of 30th to 31st of March. Further internal analysis by the Control Reporting Center CEMDAC confirmed the radar returns were consistent with a real airborne object, not environmental noise. They also confirmed that weather conditions remained stable and absolutely no military activity was scheduled in the area. While the famous photograph associated with the wave was later confessed to be a hoax, this controversy does nothing to diminish the integrity of the core, documented military event. The factual evidence rests not on disputed imagery, but on thousands of consistent witness accounts, multiple gendarmerie reports, and the irrefutable objective data recorded by the F-16's onboard radar system. The Belgian Triangle Wave remains an enduring case study because its documentation, each report, each track, each professional statement builds a consistent picture of a phenomenon that has never been conventionally explained. The records remain, preserving a frozen moment in time when a nation's military air defense system encountered an object whose performance was decades beyond its own technological capabilities. The evidence is filed, the official conclusion is recorded. But the question remains, if it wasn't ours, then whose was it? We've laid out the facts from the archives. Now we want to hear your analysis. Leave your conclusion in the comments below. Do you think this was advanced military technology, mass misidentification, or something else entirely? If you found this deep dive fascinating, please like this document, subscribe for more archival revelations, and share this extraordinary case with a fellow mystery enthusiast. Imagine a job where silence isn't comforting, it's crushing, where the air feels so heavy it presses against your eardrums. You stand completely alone across endless miles of empty space, with nothing but the wind whining through metal cables and the faint cloud of your own breath hanging in the cold in front of your face. Today, we're stepping straight into the heart of that silence, into the hidden secrets of the Copper Ridge Resort. The Copper Ridge Resort, perched high in the Colorado Rockies at 11,000 feet, was a study in isolated cold. This was the domain of the graveyard shift, and for 6 years, Callum Rafferty, a 52-year-old lift operator with a reputation for routine, had been its sole guardian. It was February 16th. At 12:05 a.m., Callum secured himself into the maintenance cabin for his methodical 40-minute inspection round. His job was simple: check the cables, pylons, and the dozens of empty passenger cabins hanging motionless on the line. The silence was absolute, broken only by the auxiliary motor's hum and the metallic clack of the wheels. Up here, he felt closer to the blinding stars above than to the world below. Callum was approaching the third pylon, Pylon 3, when the rhythm broke. His headlamp swept across the suspended passenger cabins ahead. His eyes immediately locked onto a visual impossibility. Above cabin 18, a soft, brilliant, white-blue light was hovering, silent, stationary, and approximately 30 feet above the empty car. It was unlike any resort or aircraft system. The phenomenon was not singular. There were 3 more identical lights, one above cabin 22, another over cabin 25, and a 4th positioned precisely over cabin 29. 4 isolated passenger cabins, each marked by a silent sphere of energy. He pulled out his radio, his heart beginning a heavy thud. "Marcus, this is Callum. 4 distinct lights, high intensity, above the line near Pylon 3. Check thermal or CCTV." Marcus, the night security guard at the base, reported, "Negative, Callum. All feeds are green. Clear night." Callum's cabin was now nearly adjacent to cabin 18, his car. Inside the glass, a heavy, opaque layer of thick white frost covered the interior of the windows. Inside, it was an impossible anomaly. The cabin was sealed. This internal flash freeze defied logic. He sped up, moving to cabin 22. The light and the internal frost were identical. "Marcus, get Ava on the line. This is beyond thermal. The inside of these cabins, they're covered in frost, like a rapid internal flash freeze." Ava Riker, the head of security, confirmed Marcus's report. Nothing on the cameras. She suggested reflection or a trick of the light. Callum rejected it. "Ava, this is Pylon 3 at 11,000 feet. What is freezing the inside of the glass?" He reached Pylon 2 and looked back. His breath hitched in his throat. They were gone. The 4 white-blue lights were extinguished, vanished. The cabins themselves appeared perfectly normal. The bizarre internal frost had disappeared without a trace. The entire phenomenon had been wiped clean in the span of perhaps 90 seconds. "Ova," he radioed, his voice tight. "Scratch that. The lights are gone, and the cabins are clear. They just dissolved." Ava told him to finish his inspection and logged the disturbance. Callum knew his eyes had not deceived him. The disturbance was real, even if the recording devices failed to capture it. Callum reached the summit station, his mind still reeling from the Pylon 3 event. He stepped out onto the steel deck, exposed to the raw mountain night, and saw the second, overwhelming anomaly. Floating 100 feet off the ground silently was an object of enormous size. It was long and cylindrical, perfectly cigar-shaped, at least 40 feet in length. It glowed with the same intense white-blue light as the spheres, but this light was subdued, a deep, self-contained pulse that seemed to absorb sound. The wind was completely dead. The quiet was absolute, a pressure vacuum that made his ears pop. Callum stood frozen, feeling an overriding sense of absolute, clinical inspection. The massive, silent craft simply hovered, dominating the atmosphere. He knew he was being studied, observed, and categorized, a single insect beneath a microscope. Then, with an impossible acceleration that defied physics, the cigar-shaped object did not move so much as it vanished. It became a single, brief streak of white-blue light, an arc of energy that shot vertically into the star-packed sky and was gone. Shaking, Callum radioed Ava and began the descent. He checked the time, 1:12 a.m. The ride should have taken 40 minutes. Halfway down, the magnitude of the event struck him. Every single passenger cabin, all 42 of them, were now uniformly covered in the same thick internal frost he had seen earlier. A silent, frozen fleet gliding down the mountain. He radioed Marcus. "You need to be at the base station. All 42 cabins are frosted inside." He accelerated the cabin, needing to get off the mountain. He pulled into the dock at 1:47 a.m. Marcus was waiting. "Callum, what took you so long? You were due back at 1:12 a.m. The system logged a downtime anomaly of 35 minutes. Callum stared, bewildered. The motor log confirmed it, stationary from 1:12 a.m. to 1:47 a.m. 35 minutes had vanished from his life. He pointed to the approaching cabins. "Marcus, look at the frost inside." Marcus squinted. "They're empty. Call. Just normal frost on the outside." Callum turned back to the closest car. The thick, impossible internal frost that had covered the entire fleet moments ago was gone. The slate was wiped clean. Callum was the only witness. In those 35 missing minutes, the watchers had sampled every passenger cabin, collecting a massive atmospheric sample, and meticulously erased all evidence just before his arrival. Callum and Ava Riker eventually shared their combined data. Ava, deeply disturbed by the systematic failure of the CCTV and the inexplicable time loss, had a rare moment of professional vulnerability, admitting that something outside the known resort operations had occurred. She privately noted a brief, unexplained white-blue flash in one of the high-altitude cameras, too quick and too distorted to classify, but enough to unsettle her. A week later, the encounter escalated. Callum was again on the gondola when the cabin motor abruptly failed, a non-standard malfunction. Then the cabin felt a distinct, powerful shift. It was lifted clean off the gondola cable by an unseen force. Panic finally set in. He watched the mountain drop away beneath him as his cabin was gently transported toward the summit. Then the world dissolved into a bright light, and when his vision cleared, he was no longer in the cabin. He was inside a vast, silent structure, the cigar-shaped craft he had seen, perhaps, or a chamber within it. The chamber was lit by the same gentle white-blue pulse. In the center of the room stood an entity. It was about 5 feet tall, with smooth, pale gray-white skin and a disproportionately large head. Its eyes were massive, black and almond-shaped, utterly devoid of any recognizable emotion, yet communicating a sense of profound age and intelligence. This was not a monster. It was a pure intellect. The entity raised a 3-fingered hand and touched Callum's temple. Instantly, knowledge flooded his mind, a rapid, non-verbal stream of pure understanding. He realized the 4 lights were observation drones for rapid molecular sampling. The internal frost was the collection mechanism, freezing trace data from every single human who had ridden the lift that day. This was a massive population sample, gathered and meticulously wiped clean during the 35 minutes of lost time. The beings were watchers, observers, and students of humanity, patiently observing a species evolving. Most profoundly, he grasped nonlinear time perception. The missing time wasn't stolen. His consciousness had momentarily slipped free of human linear reality. For the watchers, time was fluid, elastic, and abundant. He was returned to his cabin with a silent jolt, leaving him only with a small, circular scar on his forearm, the physical cost of seeing. Callum Rafferty and Ava Riker were changed. They knew the mountains of Colorado were a vast, high-altitude laboratory, and they had been observed. They learned to live with the truth. The Watchers are ancient, patient, and exist in a state of non-linear time, simply observing a species on the cusp of evolution. The truth is more unsettling than simple abduction. The mountains are watching, and humanity is being patiently observed, learning to swim through time instead of drown in it. Pay attention to your clocks. Notice when your moments feel elastic. These are signs that your consciousness is transitioning. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Leave a comment below. What is your theory on nonlinear time, and where are you watching from tonight? Let's discuss. The truck lifted without a sound. No roar, no dust blast, no engine strain. It rose like the desert had forgotten gravity, turning slowly as if something above it was inspecting every panel and bolt. For a few seconds it hung there, suspended in perfect silence, the headlights pointing into empty air. Then it dropped. Metal folded on impact, glass burst. The frame collapsed into itself in a way that felt ordinary only after you ignored the impossible part. Across the sand, a clean spherical darkness had hovered moments earlier, like a piece of the night sky had been cut out and lowered toward the ground. And now that void was gone, leaving only a ruined vehicle, frost forming where the desert should have been warm, and instruments that recorded a 90-second blackout as if reality had blinked. That was not the first time Cole Maddox saw it. It was the moment he realized it had been watching back. Cole Maddox had heard the stories the way everyone on the range heard them. A light too clean to be a flare. A blackout that lasted just long enough to make you doubt your own memory. A patch of desert that turned cold for no reason anyone could name. People laughed about it in daylight and went quiet about it at night. It was not that Cole had never considered it. He just refused to believe it could happen to him. The range was built for tests and measurements, not for things that slipped past both. Cole trusted routines and systems. If something strange appeared, there would be a report, a weather note, a maintenance explanation. Then it happened. And after that, the hardest part was not what he saw, but how impossible it became to keep pretending it was nothing. March 14, 2019, 2:47 a.m. Cole patrols the northern edge near the red zone boundary. Without warning, the Humvee loses all power, instant and total, as if the circuit of the world has been opened. The radio becomes pure static. A quarter-mile away, a pale blue-white column appears, perfectly straight from sky to ground. It makes no sound and casts no spill light, visible as a shape rather than illumination. Cole counts the seconds, staying awake, staying present, measuring the event by will alone. At 90 seconds, the column vanishes instantly. In the same breath, the Humvee returns to life, as if the shutdown never happened. Back at base, the logs confirm the part that should not be possible. A radar blackout occurred for the same 90 seconds within 3 miles of his location. Thermal sensors recorded a localized 40-degree drop. GPS data shows his vehicle as perfectly stationary for the full window, even though his mind insists he was alert and counting. The incident leaves no debris, no crater, no visible burn. It leaves only synchronized absence across multiple systems, like a controlled field switching on and off. 2 weeks later, Cole meets Sienna Torres at the radar center supporting the Goldwater Range. She has been tracking voids, clean geometric holes cut out of radar returns, not noise and not malfunction. These voids move in straight lines toward the northeast at roughly 400 miles per hour, consistent enough to plot, consistent enough to predict. Reports label them atmospheric anomalies, but the voids behave like objects with boundaries. Cole and Sienna compare timelines and find overlaps. The blue-white columns appear near major test sites, Yuma, Goldwater Range, and the Sonoran Desert corridors. Close to those windows, other anomalies cluster. Navigation reversals, orientation errors, instruments briefly reporting the world flipped. The pattern suggests the void is not simply a blind spot. It is an active suppression zone that degrades detection and destabilizes electronics inside its radius. They build an informal group, people who have touched the same edge from different angles. Marcus Sanders, a pilot who has felt airborne systems go dark near a void. Sarah Kelly, maintenance, who can confirm the faults do not match normal failure chains and sometimes align with magnetic irregularities. David Torres, an environmental contractor tracking electromagnetic spikes in places the range rarely discusses. None of them can name the phenomenon. All of them agree on the same conclusion. It behaves as if it is applied deliberately. They build a network, not to chase a craft, but to catch the signature in motion. Multiple EM sensors, synchronized timestamps, redundant recorders, and layered observation points designed to survive the same interference that keeps erasing the middle of events. The goal is simple. If a void forms again, they want the moment it begins, the moment it peaks, and the moment it collapses, all measured from more than one angle. On April 4th, 2019, the network triggers. A void is forming. Sanders tracks from a helicopter and describes it as a perfect dark region, as if a circle has been cut out of the night sky. It is not shadow, it is absence, a boundary so clean it looks manufactured. As he closes to roughly 200 yards, the helicopter loses power for 20 seconds. The failure is immediate, complete, and then it returns just as cleanly, proving proximity matters and proving the void is not passive. Cole approaches on the ground. The temperature drops rapidly as he enters the field, cold enough that frost forms on fabric in a desert night. The air feels dense, the silence pressed, as if sound itself has to push harder to exist. Ahead, the pale blue-white column appears again, the same color as the March event, perfectly straight, touching down near the void center. The ground begins to change where the column meets the sand. It does not scatter or burn, it reorganizes. Grains lock into repeating geometry, crystalline facets forming patterns that look engineered rather than natural, as if material is being forced into structure by an invisible rule. Then the truck lifts. No roar, no dust blast, no engine scream. It rises slowly in silence, rotates as if examined, and hangs for a brief interval that makes the desert feel like a laboratory. The moment is long enough to register the impossibility, then short enough to offer no control. The truck drops and is destroyed on impact. Above, the spherical void collapses in segmented folds, like geometric panels closing inward. It compresses, fractures into orderly sections, then disappears. The sky returns to normal immediately, leaving behind only the altered ground, the destroyed vehicle, and the data trail that proves a field was present. The event does not feel like an accident. It feels like demonstration. Months later, after the group has accumulated evidence and synchronized records, a message arrives that leads them to a meeting site. They go together. A smaller spherical void forms directly overhead, and the blue-white column descends. A tall, thin, humanoid figure emerges briefly, observed rather than approached, present for only seconds, long enough to confirm that the phenomenon is not only a field, but an operator. When it vanishes, the warning arrives in the only form that matters, a choice framed as consequence. Continue investigating and accept the risk of exposure and destabilization, or accept that some answers carry weight they are not ready to hold. The group understands the real shift. They are not watching a mystery from a distance anymore. The mystery has looked back and responded. They did not go public, not because the evidence was weak, but because the pattern was clear. Every time the phenomenon appeared, detection failed cleanly, systems went blind in a controlled radius, and time behaved like something that could be edited. Attention did not produce clarity, it produced response. So they split the files, duplicated the logs, and kept watching from farther out, treating the desert like a perimeter rather than a stage. What stays with Cole is not the lights or the void. It is the feeling of being measured. The truck lift was not a mistake. The origami collapse was not random. It looked like a sequence completing itself, a demonstration that could be repeated whenever the operator chose. The warning that followed did not demand silence. It offered a trade, curiosity in exchange for exposure. And now the question lands on you in a different way. If the most instrumented range on Earth can be turned blind for 90 seconds, what happens in places with no sensors at all? If a perfect hole can be cut out of radar, what else can be cut out and made to look like it never existed? If you ever see a column of blue-white light that does not illuminate anything, or a patch of sky that looks like absence instead of darkness, do not assume you are the only observer. Assume you have been noticed. The blast did not sound like an explosion. It looked like one. A vertical spear of electric blue punched upward from Tango 7 and turned the snowfield into daylight for a single breath. Calvin Rhodes was already running, Brooke Anders close behind, boots biting into hard drifts as the air burned cold in their lungs. When the light collapsed, the station was gone. Not broken, not burning, not scattered into debris. The antenna mast, the wind wall, the weather dome, the fuel drums, the whole footprint of human shelter simply did not exist anymore. There was only perfectly smooth snow, unmarked and untouched, as if Tango 7 had never been built. The horizon returned to darkness, and something tall remained out there watching, too many silhouettes to count before the night swallowed them again. Calvin had worked Arctic rotations long enough to believe he understood isolation. 6 years at northern research posts teaches you what darkness does to time and nerves. 3 weeks into the deep winter shift, he and Brooke were the only two people at Tango 7, 70 miles north of the Arctic Circle, surrounded by permanent night and temperatures that hovered around -38. He had heard older crews talk about strange lights and missing hours, the kind of stories that never survived paperwork. It was not that he had never considered the possibility. It was that he refused to believe it could be real until it reached down and shut the world off around him. Midwinter at Tango 7 meant permanent night and air cold enough to sting the lungs on every breath. Calvin Rhodes was checking the magnetometer along the eastern instrument belt when the horizon changed shape. A thin, pale yellow band appeared perfectly horizontal across the east, too straight to be aurora, too steady to be weather. It did not ripple, it did not drift. It held like a line drawn with a blade. Then a second detail surfaced above it, a dark craft shape hanging in the sky, wide and silent, with no blinking markers and no engine noise. Its underside looked smooth and featureless, except for 3 faint points of light spaced with geometric intent, dim enough to feel deliberate. The station radio died into absolute silence. Not static, not fade, just nothing, as if every frequency had been shut off at the source. Inside the station, digital displays began to blink and drop, batteries collapsing from full to empty in minutes. Outside devices refused to stay on long enough to record a frame. On a perimeter camera feed, the snowfield near the north berm briefly showed a tall figure standing upright, far too slender to be a bear, too still to be a person in wind. It was roughly 20 feet from the fence line, and it pulsed in sync with the yellow band, like the light was controlling both the sky and what stood beneath it. The feed darkened and vanished. When the systems returned hours later, the band and the craft were gone, leaving only the normal Arctic horizon. But Calvin could not shake the memory of that silent object above the line, and the impossible certainty that something had been close enough to look back before the station went blind. They did not report the light or the vertical shape. Without footage, it would become a story, and stories in a government chain become assessments, evaluations, and quiet removals. They wrote only what could be described as technical anomalies and tried to return to routine, but the station felt altered, as if the walls had become thin. During a final perimeter check, Calvin saw the snow outside the wind wall and froze. The ground held prints that were not prints. Perfect circles were pressed into the snow, each nearly 4 feet wide. They were spaced apart with no trail between them, no scuff marks, no stride marks, nothing to explain travel. The circles formed a pattern that began north of the station and curved around it in a tightening spiral. Inside each circle, the snow looked polished, smooth, not compressed, not melted, as if the surface had been finished rather than stepped on. A thermal scan showed the circles were warm, not slightly warm, warm enough to stand out like fresh metal in cold air, around 40 degrees, more than 60 degrees above ambient. There was no residual radiation and no heat source below. Just warmth held in perfect geometry, a signature left behind. 3 nights later, the phenomenon returned, different but more aggressive. A deep electric blue band appeared not on the horizon but higher in the sky, angled 30 degrees, stretching north to south. It began descending. The station power failed completely. Emergency systems stayed dark. Inside, temperature climbed rapidly, heat bleeding in as if something outside was radiating into the building. Through a window, Calvin saw the blue band hovering 10 feet above the snow, tall and narrow, impossibly thin yet brighter than any flare. From that light, a tall blurred form began to emerge, not walking in, but pressing through as if the air had turned into a membrane. They fled west into open snow. Behind them, Tango 7 erupted into a column of blue light that punched upward and lit the world so hard it threw sharp shadows across the tundra. In that glare, the snowfield was crowded with motionless figures, dozens, then hundreds, tall shapes spaced out as if arranged, all facing the same direction. Then the light cut off. Where the station had stood, there was nothing. No wreckage, no crater, no scattered panels, only untouched snow, smooth as a blank page. 6 months later, Calvin and Brooke returned north, 50 miles from where Tango 7 had been erased. The tundra greeted them with geometry. Circular impressions, nearly 4 feet wide, sat in ordered patterns instead of trails. Every circle held warmth through gloves, heat sealed into the snow without meltwater. From higher ground, the layout resembled a coastline map stamped into the ice. At 3:47 a.m., all electronics died at once. Cameras went black. Satellites dropped. Screens blanked. The air thickened, and a slow vibration rose through the ground, deep and rhythmic, like a massive engine idling beneath the world. Frost crept higher along fabric seams, not from wind, but from cold that felt switched on around them. Then the gold band appeared, perfectly horizontal, suspended over the tundra like a ruler line drawn across reality. Above it, a UFO resolved out of darkness, massive and silent, swallowing starlight. Its underside was smooth and curved, with recessed points of faint light arranged in precise geometry, matching the warm circles below. A thin vertical beam dropped from the craft to the band and down to the ground, clean and pale, outlining a corridor rather than lighting it. Inside the beam, the darkness looked dense, almost glassy. Snow beneath it did not stir. Along that beam, alien figures emerged, tall and narrow, long-limbed, their edges wavering as if they were not fully solid. They did not crunch through snow and left no footprints. They appeared in positions as if placed, facing Calvin's line of sight, spaced with measured intent. Some turned their heads in smooth arcs without shifting their bodies. Their surfaces were matte and dark, with faint pulses moving beneath them like light under skin, matching the vibration in the ground. The UFO lowered slightly. The beam brightened once. The warmth inside the circles intensified, and the snow within each ring looked subtly polished, as if its surface had been restructured. One figure occupied a nearer position, close enough for shallow facial contours to be visible, eyes that did not shine yet held attention like a sensor. Meaning pressed into Calvin's mind without sound, a demand shaped like a question, followed by an answer delivered as images. Tango 7 had not been destroyed. It had been removed, pulled out of a place it did not belong, a human structure interfering with layers of reality it was never meant to occupy. Calvin stopped thinking of the Arctic as empty. He began thinking of it as occupied. The lights were not a mystery flare in the distance. The prints were not a prank. The station was not destroyed. It was erased. If you ever work under permanent night and you see a perfectly horizontal band that does not ripple, or you find warm circles pressed into snow with no trail between them, do not assume you are alone. Assume you are standing near the spaces between, and that something tall is already facing your direction, waiting to see if you look back. The lighthouse glass gives one dull shudder, like something tapped it from the inside. Jenna stares out at an ocean that suddenly feels flat, stretched tight. Then cold blue points lift out of the darkness in perfect space too precise to be natural. No wind, no surf, just a pressure in her chest. She sweeps a flashlight over the water. No reflection, no shimmer, nothing. The glow fills the room, yet the sea stays ink black, as if the light refuses to fall. The blue mass shifts sideways without drifting, more like reality repositions it. She turns back to her desk. Her logbook is open, and a fresh line in her handwriting shines wet with ink. She hasn't touched the pen. Outside, the blue points hold steady, patient, exact, like they're not watching the ocean, like they're counting her. Jenna didn't take the lighthouse job because she loved being alone. She took it because the ocean felt predictable. Tides, wind, the steady sweep of the beacon. Then she noticed the first wrong thing. Some nights the coast went too still. Not calm, absent, no gulls, no slap of kelp. Even the wind sounded distant, like it had moved a mile away. And it wasn't random. It arrived like an appointment, deep in the night, on the same kind of timing, as if something out past the rocks was counting down. Jenna learned its schedule before she admitted it was a schedule. It only came on nights when the Pacific went unnaturally flat, when even the lighthouse glass stopped humming. At 2:47 a.m., a blue sphere would simply exist offshore. No approach, no blink, no drift, hanging about 50 feet above the water like it had a preferred coordinate. The lighthouse beam swept across it and nothing changed. No glare, no flare. Worse, the blue didn't reflect on the waves. The water beneath stayed too dark, as if the light refused to touch it. Jenna tried to prove it was normal. A compass on her desk would hesitate off north during each pulse, then snap back the moment the sphere vanished. Her handheld radio hiss thinned until the silence felt like pressure on her ears. And sometimes the sphere didn't move the way things move. It would shift positions without traveling. One instant over open water, the next instant closer to a sea stack. No glide, no acceleration, just a clean new location, like the distance between had been cut out. On the 8th night, she caught the detail that ended her denial. Between pulses, the surface briefly showed faint geometric seams, like panels under skin. In its center, a core of darkness appeared for a heartbeat. Not shadow, not empty space, something solid that swallowed detail like a pupil. That's when Jenna understood the worst part. It wasn't hovering near the lighthouse because the lighthouse was a landmark. It was there because she was there, returning night after night to see whether she would keep looking back. Jenna stopped calling it a sphere after the 9th night. It didn't just hover, it positioned itself where she would look. If she switched windows, it ended up framed in the new glass as if the air had been pre-measured. The lighthouse began to misbehave on the pulses. The rotating lens would hesitate for a fraction of a second. Her wall clock did the same thing, pause, then catch up, like time was being tapped and released. Each time the blue brightened, Jenna felt a low vibration inside her teeth, a hum she couldn't hear so much as feel. The sea stayed flat, no wind, no reflection beneath the light. By the 11th night, when it vanished, the sky didn't snap back immediately. The stars seemed to lag, an empty shape held in place for a few seconds. Then everything corrected itself like a screen refreshing. On the 13th night, the lighthouse beam swept across the object and suddenly went short, scattering like it had struck invisible glass. The barrier held for 3 heartbeats. Then the blue answered. A thin line dropped downward, not a spotlight, not a column, more like a measuring rod lowered from the object. It stopped a few feet above the water, perfectly level, refusing contact with the moving sea. Jenna stepped back from the window. Her radio, unplugged, dead, clicked once with a single pop of static. And she understood the shift. It wasn't just visiting on schedule anymore. It was closing the distance, not across the ocean, across the rules. The next night, the light was already waiting offshore, exactly where it always was, as if it had never left. Jenna climbed to the lantern room with her coat half-zipped, moving too fast to feel the cold until she reached the glass and stopped. The sphere hovered 50 feet above the water, pulsing like a slow heart. Its electric blue glow didn't spill onto the waves. No shimmer, no reflection, just a bright thing hanging over a black ocean that refused to acknowledge it. The hum was back too, not loud, but inside her, in her teeth, in the hinge of her jaw. The air tasted faintly metallic, like a storm had passed through the room and forgot to take the smell with it. Then the water beneath the sphere answered. Not with a wave, not with foam, with a change in texture, like the surface was becoming smooth and tight, as if the ocean had taken a breath and decided to hold it. A second light rose. It came out of the sea without a splash, no spray, no drip trail. It simply lifted, perfectly clean, and held position. Then a third, then more, ascending in a wide arc, each one the size of a small car, spacing themselves with surgical precision until Jenna realized they weren't forming a cluster. They were building a ring, miles across, centered on the first sphere like it was the anchor point. Every orb pulsed in sync, a slow, coordinated rhythm that made her stomach sink with the certainty that this wasn't random, this was timed. Jenna swung the lighthouse beam across the water on instinct. The moment the beam touched the ring, every orb brightened together, like it noticed her noticing it. The lantern room filled with that cold blue glare, and for a split second, Jenna saw her own reflection in the glass. Wide eyes, mouth slightly open, the kind of face you make when your brain runs out of explanations. The radio on the desk gave a single sharp and went dead. Not static, not fading, just absence. The way a sound disappears in a vacuum. At the center of the ring, the ocean lifted straight upward. A column formed, smooth as poured glass, rising without falling, without wobble, without any of the chaos water is supposed to have. It climbed higher than her instincts could measure. Inside the column, faint patterns moved like layered circuitry made of current and salt, lines and nodes sliding in slow, deliberate geometry. Jenna pressed her palm to the window. The glass vibrated, barely, a fine tremor that matched the pulse of the lights. When she pulled her hand away, a thin fog of condensation appeared in the shape of her fingers, except the fingertips looked slightly stretched, as if the glass had learned her hand wrong on purpose. The hum rose until it stopped being sound and became pressure behind her eyes. Then the message hit. No voice, no language, just a sequence of images too fast to hold, arriving with the weight of memory rather than dream. A coastline under ancient ice, a whale's eye in deep water reflecting starlight, forests of kelp like submerged cities, then abrupt flashes of the future. Empty nets, white coral, dead zones spreading like bruises, oceans still moving, endless motion, but nothing alive inside the movement. What shook her wasn't the horror, it was the tone beneath it. Not anger, not pleading, not threat, witness, as if something in the water had been keeping a record for a very long time. And tonight, it cracked the archive open, just long enough to show her what was being saved. The column lowered as smoothly as it rose. The ring loosened. One by one, the orbs dimmed and sank back into darkness without ripples, as if the sea swallowed them without chewing. Only the original sphere remained, hovering in the same spot as always, pulsing steady and patient. Jenna checked the clock. 2:47. Exactly, but her logbook was open on the desk, not where she'd left it. A fresh line of ink sat there in her own handwriting, still slightly glossy, like it had been written seconds ago. She didn't remember picking up the pen. The line read, "We remember what you drop." By morning, Jenna found a perfect ring of kelp on the rocks below the lighthouse, too neat for any tide. That night at 2:47, the ocean went still again. No lights, just the same low hum in the glass. Jenna kept writing anyway, because it felt less like something was visiting, and more like something had always been there, finally paying attention. If it happened to you, would you leave proof behind, or try to forget the sea ever looked back? Night in the Rockies. The cab is the only warm box of light for miles. Jackson grips the wheel as the road ahead looks edited, like someone erased the depth from the world and left only a flat strip of asphalt in its place. The beams from his truck still blaze, yet they stop short in midair, as if the darkness has weight. Then a pressure settles over the roof, not wind, not weather, something vast and deliberate. The engine sound thins into a hollow hum, every gauge steady but meaningless, and the air inside the cab turns metallic and sharp. Jackson lifts his eyes to the windshield and realizes he is not approaching the anomaly. It is approaching him. October 2019, Colorado. The stretch from Grand Junction toward Gunnison is the kind of road that feels empty even when you are not alone. Just black mountains, cold air, and the hum of a diesel engine trying to keep you anchored to reality. Jackson had 15 years behind the wheel. He knew the difference between fear and imagination. That night, the road taught him a third thing. The line ran parallel to the highway, bright but sourceless, not blinking like aircraft lights, not shimmering like reflection, just a clean glowing stroke suspended in open air. Jackson slowed. Mary leaned forward, trying to make sense of it, trying to film it. The phone struggled to lock focus, hunting the darkness, refusing the line like it did not want to be recorded. Then the headlights failed in the strangest way. The bulbs still burned. The dashboard still glowed, but the beam would not reach the road. It stacked up in front of the grill, flat and useless, as if the night had turned solid. The truck shuddered and died. A hard cut of silence, no wind through mirrors, no engine vibration, just their breathing. Seconds later, everything returned at once. Engine, radio, normal light. Jackson drove on, trying to laugh it off. 10 minutes later, Mary checked the GPS. Same coordinates, same mile marker, same distance to Gunnison, still locked at 38 to 40 miles like the road had reset. They passed signs they had already passed. They saw a reflector that felt familiar, then impossible. Jackson kept driving anyway, because stopping made it feel worse. The line returned. This time it did not float beside the road. It stretched across the highway ahead, widening into a pale tear in the dark. The air around it looked wrong, like heat shimmer without heat. Jackson did the only thing his instincts could agree on. He put his foot down and drove straight through. The moment the truck crossed the seam, the pressure in their ears released. The GPS jumped forward. The next sign finally changed. The road began behaving like a road again. 3 months later, Jackson had to take Highway 50 again, daylight this time, alone. He told himself daylight meant safety. It did not. Midway through the run, he saw a woman in a white dress standing on the shoulder. No coat, no bag, no car nearby. Just her, perfectly still as if placed there. As he approached, the details broke. Her eyes sat too far apart. Her mouth looked too wide. Her skin had the waxy calm of a store mannequin trying to imitate a human being. Jackson stared, caught between braking and fleeing. The truck passed her, and she turned to follow him. Not like a person, like a display on a rotating stand. A smooth mechanical pivot that kept her face tracking the cab until Jackson could no longer see her in the mirror. Then Jackson felt it, that prickling certainty you get when you are being measured. Not watched casually, watched with purpose. A thought slid in, quiet and cold, not in words, but in meaning. We know you. Jackson told himself it was just a weird roadside moment. Then his CB radio hissed, one thin line of static, clean and steady, like a tone. No voice, no chatter, just a single frequency that didn't belong. A mile later, the world started to thin out. Not visually. Colorado still looked like Colorado, but sound became too clean. The tire noise dulled, like someone lowered the volume on the universe. Even the vibration through the wheel felt filtered. Jackson glanced at the clock. The digits looked normal, but the seconds didn't tick. So much as hold, like time was deciding whether to move. Then his headlights did something impossible in broad daylight. They were on, bright, normal, and yet the beam hit the air ahead and stopped, flattened against an invisible surface just beyond the hood, as if the light couldn't move forward. Jackson whispered, no. He eased off the gas, instinct, then tried to correct back into the lane. The steering didn't resist, it wasn't stiff. It felt like the road had become a track and the truck was no longer his. And then the engine shut down, not a cough, not a sputter, a clean surgical cut. RPM dropped to 0, the hum vanished. The cab became a sealed box of silence. He coasted to the shoulder, hands shaking, trying the ignition. Nothing. The dash stayed lit, but the lights looked wrong, too steady, too perfect, like a screenshot of a dashboard rather than a living system. Jackson looked down at his phone on the seat. The screen was awake. One word sat there as if it had always been waiting. Stay. He didn't remember unlocking it. He didn't remember anyone typing it. And then he saw the shadow. It wasn't cast by clouds. It didn't match the sun's angle. It slid over the road in a shape that shouldn't exist. A triangle, wide enough to swallow his rig. Jackson forced himself to look up. A black triangular craft hung above Highway 50, low, silent, with 3 faint points of light at its corners. No seams, no detail. It didn't reflect sunlight so much as refuse it. The air changed, cold pressure behind the eyes, a metallic bite like ozone. From the center underside, something unfolded. Not a spotlight, but a hard-edged column of pale light, as straight as a doorway drawn into the air. Dust stopped drifting, and inside that column a figure resolved, tall, thin, with limbs that bent the wrong way, joints stacked where joints shouldn't be. It didn't walk down. It simply became present on the asphalt as if distance had been folded. Jackson's throat locked. He couldn't scream. Then the contact arrived, not through sound, but straight into his head, sharp and emotionless. Seen. A second pulse followed. Images that weren't his choice. The white hovering line from months ago, the GPS loop, the moment reality tore across the road. And then, the woman in the white dress, now not standing at the shoulder, but standing inside his memory like a bookmark. The same wrong face, the same fixed attention. Another thought pressed in, colder. Watcher, lure, alignment confirmed. The figure lifted a long hand and touched the truck's window. The fingers were too long, too many bends. The gesture wasn't threatening, it was testing, like learning what glass is. Jackson tried to move, his body didn't respond. Not paralysis, something worse. Like his impulse had nowhere to go. Then the final thought landed, heavy as a verdict. Marked, continued. Sound snapped back, wind, distant traffic, the creak of the cab, the column of light was gone, the triangle was gone, the phone screen returned to normal like it had never shown anything. The engine restarted by itself. Jackson sat there breathing hard, staring at empty sky, knowing the scariest part wasn't the shutdown, it was how precisely it had all been timed. As if the roadside woman wasn't random, she was a trigger, a sign that the next stage had begun. That night he checked his dashcam. The file list jumped from 2:13 p.m. to 2:29 p.m., 16 minutes missing. The gap wasn't a corrupted file. It was cleanly removed, as if somebody had highlighted a strip of time and cut it out. 2 days later, a plain envelope appeared in his mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single photo, taken from high above Highway 50 in daylight, his rig on the shoulder, and above it, unmistakable, the black triangle hanging perfectly centered. At the bottom, one line, "You were seen." And Jackson finally understood what the woman's stare had been. Not curiosity, not warning, a handoff. Jackson says the worst part wasn't the craft, it was the feeling that Highway 50 had turned into a checkpoint and he'd been processed. Because you can explain a blackout, you can explain a GPS loop, but you can't explain a photo taken from above your truck when you never saw anything up there. So tell me, if it happened to you, would you keep driving or would you vanish first? What kind of light can melt a perfect circle in snow without registering as heat, shut down a diesel tanker's entire electrical system except the headlights, and then carve symbols into glass that never fade even after the ice is gone? And if those same symbols later appear pulsing inside an oil pipeline like coded coordinates, who exactly is trying to communicate through the storm? 3 weeks after the Dalton Road incident, Gideon Merrick walked the pipeline corridor with a thermal camera and a checklist mindset, expecting nothing but cold gradients and ordinary faults. Yet he carried a single detail from a driver's report that would not leave him alone. An orange light that did not behave like fire and symbols that survived ice. The corridor around him felt too quiet for open Alaska, and his CB scan picked up short rhythmic bursts that sounded less like interference and more like something testing the channel. Gideon's thermal display found the first anomaly before his eyes did. A clean orange point hovering about 3 feet above the snow, perfectly defined and unaffected by wind-driven flakes, and directly beneath it, the snow had melted into a flawless circle, yet the thermal readout showed no heat source at all. He moved closer and watched the circle widen by a few inches in a smooth, perfect ring, as if the snow was following an instruction rather than melting, and his headset filled with a low tone that he felt in his teeth and ribs more than he heard. More orange points appeared in mirrored pairs along the right-of-way, spaced with deliberate regularity. Then 6 lights assembled into a pentagon above the pipeline and began rotating with slow certainty, and the low tone deepened into a pressure that made Gideon's stomach tighten. He raised the camera and saw the points brighten in sequence like a scan. Then the lights lowered until they hovered just above the steel, and the impossible part was how the steel reacted. Because the orange did not flare or burn, it seeped, sliding into the metal surface as if the pipeline had become permeable. As the orange sank into the line, dim pulses ignited along the pipe in a repeating cadence, a chain of faint orange nodes blinking like a message traveling through steel. And Gideon realized he was not watching a phenomenon, he was watching a process. He scraped a small metal sample from a site where the glow had concentrated, and the fragment felt warmer than it should in that cold. Then the pulses marched onward in groups, pausing, repeating, then shifting, like a code that expected to be read. That was when Gideon contacted Jude Rasson, the diesel driver whose report had started circulating through the corridor crews. And Jude agreed to meet only because the symbols were still etched into his windshield, still visible at certain angles as if the glass had been engraved by frost itself. Jude described a whiteout night at -32°C when orange lights formed a corridor along the road. His engine died while his headlights stayed bright, and a tall, thin figure stepped out of an orange door and wrote numbers into instant fractal ice on his windshield with a hand that had too many finger lengths. And Jude's timeline did not add up afterward, 4 hours missing on a stretch that should have taken 90 minutes. Gideon did not need to believe every detail to recognize the pattern, because Jude's etched symbols matched the grouping rhythm of the pulses Gideon had just filmed. As if the corridor had written the same language on glass first, then upgraded to steel. Gideon brought his thermal stills and the scraped metal sample to Jude Rassin, and one look at Jude's etched windshield was enough, because the clusters matched the pipeline pulse cadence in the same pauses and repeats. They drove to a safe pullout near the corridor to test whether the lights reacted to attention, and the moment they stopped, Gideon's thermal display found clean orange points hovering 3 feet above snow with perfect edges, unaffected by wind. Then more points appeared in mirrored pairs like posts placed on a ruler, and the air inside the cab felt pressurized without sound. The kind of silence that makes teeth ache. When Gideon raised the camera, one point drifted sideways to stay aligned with the cab as if locking on, and Jude's etched symbols caught the headlights and looked briefly deeper, as if the grooves were filling with faint orange from inside the glass. Then a thin, fractal edge of frost formed along the lines even though the cabin heat was running, and Gideon realized the corridor could rewrite water and light on demand. The pipeline in Gideon's thermal view began to answer, dim pulses igniting along the steel in the same grouped cadence, traveling in runs, pausing, repeating, then shifting as if correcting itself. And when Gideon held the metal sample near the window, the fragment warmed in his glove, and the camera showed a faint orange response inside it, like the corridor could address the material directly even after removal. The dash lights dipped in the same beat as the pulses and the orange points outside, and the CB channel opened by itself, carrying a thin layered cadence under the hum, not words, a measured counting that returned Gideon's own breathing a fraction of a second late, as if the radio had become a mirror. Then the nearest orange point brightened, and the snow beyond it stopped swirling for a heartbeat, and a tall vertical absence appeared where the storm should have been, a narrow, darker shape that did not blur in wind-driven flakes. And as it moved closer without stepping, the cabin temperature dropped in a single clean notch. Jude turned toward the empty passenger seat as if someone had just sat down, and Gideon saw a second outline in the passenger window reflection, too tall and too thin to be either man, positioned exactly where an unseen observer would stand. Then the etched symbols on the windshield flared once in faint orange, and the fractal frost traced outward like a diagram being completed. Gideon tried to speak, and his voice died in his throat, while the CB cadence paused as if waiting for input, then resumed with a slightly different rhythm, and Jude's hand froze on the ignition when the engine coughed once and went silent, while the headlight stayed bright and steady like a held breath. Gideon kept filming with shaking hands until the thermal screen bloomed white, not overexposure, but a clean blank field, and in that blank Jude's silhouette and Gideon's silhouette appeared twice, offset by inches, as if the cab had two versions of the same moment layered together. Then the orange points outside collapsed inward, like they were being pulled into a single coordinate. After that, the record breaks, because Gideon's camera file ends mid-frame. Jude's dash clock later shows a jump that neither of them can explain, and the only new thing left behind is a fresh thin line etched into the glass beside the old symbols, a line that looks like a direction, and a final CB burst that repeats 3 beats, then silence. If the orange lights can melt perfect circles without heat and write persistent symbols into both glass and steel, then they are manipulating matter through rules that do not require fire, and if their code points to weak spots in the pipeline, then the entities may be caretakers trying to prevent a disaster, or they may be rehearsing control by practicing on infrastructure first before they practice on people. Gideon keeps walking the corridor with a camera and a growing dread that the next message will not be about the pipeline at all. Are the entities protecting the wilderness or protecting their own route through it? Tell me what you think happened down there, and if you want the next case, please hit like and subscribe. The last transmission from St. Lawrence Island was not a report, it was a warning. They are here, so many. and then the station went silent as if someone had removed it from the world. When Morgan Hale arrived months later, the power was on, the coffee was still there, and the security footage showed 7 seconds where snow stopped falling, and the staff stood frozen like statues before vanishing out of the frame. In the winter of 2019, Arctic Station Echo sat in northern Alaska, about 60 miles from the nearest settlement, and Morgan Hale commanded it with the disciplined calm of a veteran Air Force pilot who had spent 15 years trusting procedures more than instincts. The outpost watched the sky with the long-range ANFPS-117 radar until the routine broke into clean interruptions, radar ghosts that blinked in and out at precise intervals, and a faint blue-white shimmer on the horizon that no aurora forecast predicted. Tyler Kovac called Hale to the console because the returns were not behaving like weather and not behaving like aircraft, and the first detail that tightened Hale's focus was geometry. Because the tracks did not smear or drift, they appeared and vanished like a diagram being tested. Outside, the sky looked empty, yet the station radio caught a thin harmonic tone under the noise, and Hale felt the uneasy certainty that whatever was out there was not lost. It was probing, checking which sensors reacted, and which humans would step into -40 air to confirm what the radar insisted was real. Tyler tracked the contact as it blinked in and out in clean intervals, returning to the same point with a precision that felt deliberate, and each reappearance came with impossible jumps, 8,000 to 20,000 feet, dead stop to over 500 knots. Then it settled into a perfect 5-mile radius circle around the station like a compass drawing on the sky. There was no transponder, no radio call, and no wind smear, and the return was so sharp it felt less like reflection and more like something allowing itself to be seen. When the track closed to within 20 miles, the primary split and released 6 smaller returns that locked into a flawless hexagon around it with spacing that never changed, and the formation rotated as one body while the center point held steady, and Hale felt the same cold certainty he felt in the cockpit when a threat chose its approach. He stepped outside with night optics into -40 air and saw it at last. A blue-white ring pulsing like breath with 6 colder points riding its perimeter, and the whole structure slid across the stars without acceleration, as if inertia did not apply. Then the ring dropped toward 3,000 feet, and the pulse quickened once, and everything cut out at the same instant, radar clean, sky empty, radio silent, leaving Hale staring at darkness that felt staged. Because the disappearance was too perfect to be escape, it was a shutdown. Hale spent 3 hours writing a detailed report with times, ranges, speed brackets, altitude jumps, and the hexagon formation, sending it through secure channels to Elmendorf and onward to NORAD, and he expected either silence or skepticism, but the response arrived as action instead of words. Before the next night cycle ended, a C-130 with no markings dropped onto the snow strip and unloaded modern surveillance gear, infrared cameras, electromagnetic sensors, and a small team who gave names without histories, and the upgrade changed the station's atmosphere the way a locked door changes a hallway, because everyone now understood they were not just watching the sky, they were being watched by their own command. Hale received a short order that left no room for curiosity: observe and record, and do not attempt contact. And the wording carried an implication that unsettled him more than any official confirmation, because it suggested contact had already happened elsewhere and did not end well. Tyler asked why the order mattered if the objects vanished on command, and Hale had no answer that felt safe, only the sense that the phenomenon had demonstrated control of detection, and the only thing the station could still control was its own behavior. Months later, a monitoring station on St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Sea went silent after a final message that arrived stripped of professionalism and full of fear. They are here, so many, and the abruptness triggered a response that pulled Hale into the field alongside a small team assembled in haste, people who asked for sensor data first and names second. When their aircraft arrived, the station was powered, doors intact, equipment running, coffee left in cups, and 6 personnel missing with no tracks that made sense. And the only evidence that refused to be rational was the security footage, because at the moment of disappearance, time seemed to stop for 7 seconds. Snowflakes hung suspended mid-fall. A dangling cable froze mid-sway. The staff stood motionless like statues, and then the frame jumped and they were gone, leaving the room unchanged except for the absence of people. Outside, the upgraded sensors came alive as if something had allowed them back online, and the radar display filled with returns, not one craft but dozens, forming layered rings around the island that tightened and loosened with orchestral coordination, while a second layer of contacts flickered above them at different altitudes, like a stacked geometry that refused to resolve into a single picture. Through night optics, Hale saw the sky populate with cold points of light that moved without visible acceleration, sliding into new positions like pieces on a board, and then a larger structure descended to within 1,000 feet of the station. Not a simple craft, but a complex presence that looked wrong to the eye, edges appearing and disappearing depending on where Hale focused, depth folding into itself, as if parts of it existed at angles the mind could not hold. And beneath it, the snowfield brightened in faint hexagonal cells that pulsed in sync with the surrounding fleet. Then the contact moved inward, and Hale felt it not as a voice in the room, but as a transmission inside his thoughts. A kind of mathematical music that carried images with it. Earth seen from above, ice thinning, forests burning, cities bright at night, and then other worlds that looked nothing like human maps. And the message was not a sentence, but an understanding pressed whole into his mind, that these beings had observed humanity for a long time, and that the planet's trajectory mattered to them for reasons they did not fully explain. Several members of the team staggered or gripped the table as if the images had weight, and on a monitor the station's personnel roster flickered as if being rewritten, names blinking in and out like radar returns. And Hale realized the phenomenon was not limited by location, it was moving through systems, attention, and memory. When the transmission eased, the island was still encircled, the fleet holding position with impossible precision. And inside the station, the cameras captured only more absence. Chairs slightly shifted, a half-written note on a clipboard that ended mid-word, and a thin layer of frost fractals spreading across the inner window glass in deliberate geometric branching. The missing staff did not walk back into frame. No footsteps approached. No voices returned on the internal radios, only the sense that the station had been processed and left running like a device. Hale stood in a room full of power and equipment and felt the cold truth settle. Whatever took them could also decide whether returning them served its purpose, and the silence that followed felt less like an accident and more like an answer. After St. Lawrence, the official story became silence. But inside that silence, a new structure formed. Project Aurora, a compartmented effort to collect data, compare patterns, and prepare for a future contact that might not be optional. Hale understood the unsettling truth that the phenomenon could appear as a ring, a hexagon, a fleet, or a structure that did not fit 3 dimensions, and in every form it demonstrated the same thing: control of time slices, control of geometry, and control of what humans could record and later swear happened. If the beings can pause 7 seconds of falling snow, surround an island with stacked formations, and leave a staff station running without the staff, are they studying us, warning us, or practicing the mechanics of taking without giving back? Leave your theory in the comments, and if you want the next case, hit like and subscribe. The call came in like any other: loose cattle on Highway 16, a routine hazard in Texas hill country, the kind of thing that ends with reflective cones and irritated ranch hands. But Nina Caldwell arrived to a pasture that looked staged. 63 head of cattle stood in a ruler straight line, perfectly still, all facing the same patch of sky. No chewing, no swishing tails, no restless hooves, just a synchronized stillness that felt less like fear and more like instruction. And then her phone clock slid backward, minute by minute, as if time itself had been told to wait. Nina had been a Texas state trooper for 7 years. She trusted patterns, tire marks, heat shimmer, human lies. She knew what panic looked like and what fraud sounded like. That night, outside Medina and Bandera, she felt something worse than panic. She felt a system operating with calm confidence, using the land, the animals, and the air above them like components. Hill country was supposed to be open space and honest darkness. Instead, it became a sealed room. Bo Harrington met her near the fence line, older hands shaking with a kind of dread that didn't ask for comfort. The cattle were not scattered across the road like the dispatch said. They were gathered, arranged, aligned, as if the pasture had turned into a runway. Nina stepped into the grass, and the world grew quieter in a way she couldn't explain. Not the normal quiet of rural Texas, but an engineered quiet. Insects still existed, the breeze should have existed, yet everything that made the night feel alive was suddenly muted, as if someone had lowered the volume on nature. A faint light pulsed on the roof of the cattle barn. It was dim, almost shy, but it had a rhythm. A slow heartbeat of illumination that made the barn look temporarily unreal. The strangest part wasn't the glow, it was the shadows. Fence posts, railing, even the cattle themselves cast shadows that leaned toward the light, not away from it. The pasture's logic had flipped. Nina caught herself staring at the ground, trying to force physics to behave. When she checked her phone again, it insisted the evening was still in the 7 o'clock hour. Her patrol car's dashboard clock agreed. Her wristwatch did not. Her sense of time did not. The sky looked like after 9, the deep kind of dark that arrives when the day is fully gone. Yet the devices around her kept rewinding, as if something overhead wanted the night to last longer. The clouds began to move with purpose. They didn't drift. They rotated, tightening into a perfect circle, a clean geometry that didn't belong to weather. The ring widened and stabilized, and at the center of it hung a shape so dark it seemed to drink starlight. Not a silhouette, not a shadow, a mass. Nina felt her throat close as the air temperature dropped fast, too fast, the kind of sudden chill that doesn't come from wind. Heat fled the yard in a single breath. Her skin tightened, her fingertips went numb. On the barn roof, figures appeared, tall, thin, wrong in their proportions. They didn't move like people crossing a surface. They repositioned with minimal motion, like frames missing between moments. Their bodies were long and spare, with angles that hinted at joints but refused to confirm them. Nina couldn't settle her eyes on faces. She could only register the fact of attention. The cattle did not run. They remained lined up like witnesses. The pulsing roof light brightened and the shadows bent harder toward it, as if gravity had begun taking instructions from illumination. Nina reached for procedure, for radio calls and backup requests, for anything that would turn this into an incident with a normal ending. But the air had a different plan. The sound around her thinned. The usual world felt farther away, like she was standing inside a bubble that didn't share rules with the road behind her. Then her mind slipped, not into sleep, not into unconsciousness, into somewhere adjacent, a sideways fall into a different awareness. Nina's awareness didn't fade like sleep. It slid sideways, as if the ranch and the night were still there, only separated by a thin pane of glass. One moment she was in hill country air that smelled of dust and cattle. The next, she stood under a purple-gray sky that felt too low, lit by light that came from everywhere at once and made shadows feel unnecessary. The ground held her weight without texture. In the distance, structures rose that didn't look built so much as grown, ribbed arcs and layered shells that pulsed faintly like a system breathing. No doors, no windows, no obvious machines. Yet the place felt like a controlled environment, a sterile field designed to test one thing. Her. A pressure gathered behind her eyes. Not pain at first, but a firm hand on the back of her thoughts, turning her attention where it wanted. Memories surfaced in clean sequence, pulled forward as if selected from labeled drawers. Her first day in uniform, crash scenes, night radios, the habit of scanning for danger even when nothing was happening. It didn't feel like interrogation, it felt like measurement. The presence was immense, not in size but in certainty. Meaning arrived without words, packed tight and unfolding inside her mind. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't kind. It simply observed with a calm so complete it made human fear feel loud. Then she understood what was happening at the ranch. They weren't interested in cattle as livestock. They were interested in what cattle did to people. The protective instinct, the way a rancher guarded his herd, the way a trooper stepped between harm and someone else. That was the signal they were studying, the human reflex to shield. And Bo Harrington was the target. A fixed period, 47 days. Not a threat in the human sense, more like a clinical decision. Nina sensed that the bargaining itself was part of the process. to see who would offer themselves, to see what humans did when the danger wasn't a gun or a storm, but an intelligence that could rewrite the rules of the room. So she pushed her intent forward like a badge in the dark and offered a trade. Not pleading, structure. She presented herself as a better variable, trained observation, stress discipline, a mind conditioned to record detail. If they wanted to study protection and empathy, she could give them a cleaner sample than Bo, and she could survive the process long enough to remember it. The presence evaluated her with frightening neutrality. The pressure behind her eyes intensified, and the world seemed to pause on the edge of an answer. Agreement arrived without warmth. It felt like a latch releasing. The purple-gray sky deepened. The grown structures seemed to lean toward her awareness. She felt herself being opened, not harmed, but unfolded. Layers of memory and identity briefly exposed, scanned, and stacked back into place. For an instant, she saw a wider grid beyond this space. Moving lights in the dark, corridors of brightness connecting points like routes on a map that wasn't meant for humans. Then it snapped shut. Nina sensed the ranch again like a distant sound through walls. She understood she had only a second to leave proof in the human world, a single thread that might survive what came next. Her last act of control was practical, not heroic, forcing a message out to her department before the connection collapsed. And then the barn, the cattle, the rotating clouds, all of it fell away. Not destroyed, simply removed, as if a square of the world had been folded inward. The study began. Nina came back on Christmas morning, alone in wet grass with no tracks, like the night had been removed and put back wrong. Her body was fine, but time didn't feel straight anymore. Some moments arrived like memories from the future. She kept the job because routine was the only thing that still felt real. Officially, nothing happened. When she tried to write it down, the details slipped, turning soft and ordinary, like the truth didn't want a record. Now, on empty stretches of Highway 16, she doesn't scan for headlights. She watches the sky for seams. The scariest part wasn't what they showed her. It was how calm she felt agreeing to it. What if the bargain never ended? It just moved inside her. If your shadow ever pointed the wrong way, would you keep driving or stop and look up? Drop your theory in the comments. Subscribe for more missing time and repeating patterns. This isn't fiction, it's a warning. The truck vanished in an instant. The lane went empty like it had never been there. And when Grant checked his watch, he realized 15 minutes of his night had been cut out cleanly. The only thing left behind was Sierra Mays' final video frame, her face drowned in blue light inside a cab that looked completely empty to the naked eye. At 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, Officer Grant Reich is running patrol on Highway 207, roughly 30 miles from the Oklahoma line, a flat stretch of Texas Panhandle where the darkness feels wide and the road noise is usually honest. Then his headlights catch a full-size 18-wheeler stopped dead in the northbound lane, with no hazard lights, no flares, no reflective triangles, just a heavy shape planted in the middle of the road like it has been placed there to be found. Grant pulls behind it, angles his cruiser lights for visibility, and expects the usual: a groggy driver, a mechanical failure, maybe a medical event. But the first detail that unsettles him is the total absence of human reaction, because no cab light turns on and no door opens and no silhouette moves behind the glass. Grant approaches with his flashlight and sees the truck is locked tight, the mirrors still, the windshield dark, and when he checks the cab and the sleeper area through the windows, he sees only empty seats and empty bunks and a dashboard that looks powered down. Then he radios dispatch for the owner information and hears a reply that bends the moment into something stranger, because the registered operator, Sierra Mays, is on the phone right now, and she is reporting that she is inside the cab. She can see the police lights, but she cannot see any officer walking toward her truck. And she is asking why no one is opening the door. Grant asks dispatch to patch Sierra through directly, and when he hears her voice, it is not distant or unclear. It is immediate and frightened, and she says she has been sitting there for 20 to 30 minutes after deciding to pull over because the air inside the cab suddenly felt heavy and the road ahead seemed to ripple. Then she says she watched the cruiser arrive and stop behind her, yet the side mirror shows no one exiting. He asks Sierra to describe the cab, and she says there is a blue electronic light flooding the space without casting shadow, a glow that feels like it is coming from every surface at once, and from nowhere at all. And as she speaks, Grant looks at the truck with his own eyes and sees no blue glow on the glass and no spill on the asphalt. But when she agrees to switch to a video call, the screen in Grant's hand shows Sierra sitting upright in the driver's seat with her face washed in that blue light, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, her eyes tracking the flashing police lights outside, and the impossible contradiction locks into place, because the video shows a living person trapped in the cab while his direct view through the window shows an empty seat. Then the time slip appears, because Sierra tells him her clock reads 1:37 a.m., while Grant's cruiser clock has already rolled to 2:31 a.m., and she insists she has not been stopped long. Yet Grant checks her location history through dispatch and sees the GPS ping has been stationary far longer than she believes, more than an hour and a half, and as the call continues, the video stutters in tiny jumps, not like poor reception, but like frames being removed, and each stutter briefly sharpens the blue glow into geometric bands that crawl across the ceiling and down the window frames, as if the light is scanning the cabin. Grant decides the contradiction ends only when he gets the door open, so he moves back to the driver's side lock with his entry tool. And as he sets the metal against the seam, the wind around the highway drops out as if someone has turned off the atmosphere, leaving a silence so complete that even dust in his cruiser lights seems to stop drifting, and the quiet feels pressurized, as if the world is holding its breath. His radio clicks once, then a voice comes through that is not Sierra and not dispatch, a voice with a strange cadence and a tone that never fully settles into any familiar accent, and it speaks as if reading from a rule book that does not care about his authority, telling him to step away, telling him that the civilian is not in his vehicle, telling him that the civilian is here. Grant freezes, because his body understands before his mind can organize it, and on the phone, Sierra begins to cry harder and says the blue light is thickening. She can feel it on her skin like static, and behind her in the video, the sleeper curtain lifts slightly, even though nothing moves it, revealing a deeper darkness that looks too deep for the small space. And then Grant forces his hands to move again and applies pressure to the lock. The moment the tool bites, the entire truck disappears without sound or displacement. No tire marks, no oil smell, no fading engine heat, just an empty strip of highway that makes his flashlight beam feel suddenly useless. And Grant staggers backward into the void of space where 40,000 pounds of metal had been, and his radio hisses into silence. When the wind returns, Grant checks his watch and sees 15 minutes have vanished, and his cruiser dashcam shows a gap in footage that begins at the instant the air went still, as if the road itself refused to be recorded. And in the empty lane, his headlights reveal nothing but clean asphalt, yet on the phone the call has dropped, and dispatch is calling his unit name with rising urgency, as if he has been gone longer than he can account for. In the days that follow, Grant tries to file a report that fits inside policy language, but every sentence collapses under its own contradiction, because the truck was present and absent at the same time, because the occupant was visible only through a screen, because time peeled away 15 minutes in a single breath, and the more he repeats the facts, the more he feels that voice on the radio was not warning him, it was classifying him. A few nights later, he receives a quiet invitation to a support group in Amarillo, and in a small room filled with folding chairs and paper cups, Grant hears his story reflected back through other mouths. Ranchers, mechanics, a volunteer firefighter, a dispatcher, all describing blue light with no shadow, absolute stillness in the air, and the feeling of being observed from angles that should not exist. The frequency is increasing across the panhandle, that vehicles return days or weeks later with electrical systems dead as if something drained them through the wiring. That paint and plastic show signs of intense ultraviolet exposure, and that lab tests on scraped residue have revealed metal isotopes that do not match known terrestrial ratios. Those who tried to shoot the light or force their way through it suffered brain injury, lost speech, or woke with language stripped out of their mouths, as if the mechanism that took them could also remove the tool they used to describe it. Grant leaves that meeting with an unspoken certainty that Sierra is not an isolated case. She is an example, and the alien presence is using the highway as a controlled environment, placing paradox in the road to see who will approach and who will remember. 16 days later, Grant returns to Highway 207 before dawn, and the blue light blooms over the asphalt with no shadow, flattening distance until the road looks mapped by faint geometric grids. Then his radio turns on by itself, and the same non-human cadence states, "Sierra Mays is alive, preserved, and under study, and she will be returned when the study is complete." And his dash screen flashes a single frozen frame of Sierra's face lit in blue before collapsing into static. The voice tells Grant he has been marked because he saw and retained the memory, and that his role is to carry the account. And he drives away understanding the highway is not a place anymore. It is a channel that can store people like data. If Sierra can exist on video while the cab stays empty, what is the corridor actually moving? Share your theory, then hit like and subscribe.